Chair Engardio, aye. Member Dorsey? Member Dorsey, aye. Chair Stephanie?
Aye.
Chair Stephanie, aye. I have 3 ayes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can you please call item 3?
Yes. Item number 3 is a hearing to consider neighborhood and community impacts of permanent supportive housing facilities, including requirements or policies for on-site security services.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This item is sponsored by Supervisor Dorsey, and I will turn it over to him to introduce the item and our presenters.
Great. Thank you, Chair Stephanie. I'd like to thank Chair Stephanie for scheduling this hearing and my colleagues for taking part in it. I want to express my appreciation, too, to the residents of District 6 who have taken time to be here, and others who were not here but who emailed and expressed their perspectives in other ways. I also want to thank the representatives from the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, Homerise, and other organizations in attendance, and I look forward to an informative hearing. Before we get started, I want to set a tone for this hearing that will hopefully assuage concerns some have expressed about the purpose of this hearing. No one should doubt my support for the concept of permanent supportive housing, or PSH, as I think it will be referred to in this hearing. I'm also committed to making sure that we get PSH right, not solely for those it serves, but also for the community it is a part of. I recognize the vital role that PSH plays as a tool amidst an array of needed solutions to address homelessness. I also recognize the many difficulties faced by HSH and other agencies in seeking locations and approvals for the construction or conversion of housing for PSH use. In fact, this concern is partly why I'm motivated to dig into this issue here today and to help ensure the long-term viability of our city's solutions for unhoused residents. For me, this hearing is not to beat up on any city department or nonprofit partner, and I will confess that I have no bigger pet peeve in local government. Is something that I have seen in many years working in this building. When city leaders set up city departments for failure and then make a big show of blaming them for failing. I believe very strongly that as a supervisor, it's our role to make sure that our first question is, what are we doing as elected leaders to make sure that our city departments and our nonprofit partners are set up for success and to best achieve the objectives that we ask of them. So I'm interested in identifying and highlighting any shortcomings in how we are operating PSH, either at a program level or relative to specific locations, so that we can build consensus on solutions to these problems. Understanding that if there are solutions that the department can't afford, then that's a Board of Supervisors issue. That's a responsibility for us to make sure that we are setting our department up with the funding that it needs to succeed. I want us all to understand that what's not working in our PSH program as it relates to addressing broader community impacts. I want to know where and how we are failing to meet the mark to ensure our homeless housing solutions adequately serve the needs of their residents while meeting the reasonable expectations of their neighbors. As a city government, we cannot shy away from hearing and addressing legitimate concerns raised by residents about the manner in which we are carrying out our city programs, including PSH. In fact, especially PSH. Our funding for permanent supportive housing is wholly derived from the generosity of San Francisco voters. And when I introduced this hearing, one of the things that I mentioned is whether it's directly related to 2018's Prop C or indirectly in terms of the priorities of the people that we elect, it is voters' generosity that gives us budget for permanent supportive housing, and we owe it to them to get it right, or we risk losing their generosity and support. So that's the purpose of having a hearing. So I want to have this discussion with an eye toward maintaining the public's confidence in this program for decades to come. We cannot ignore or discount the very real impacts some of our operational failures are having on city residents, who by and large share my strong commitment and support for solving the homelessness problem. Nor can we ignore concerns of residents who are deeply frustrated with the conditions in their community and have grown deeply distrustful of our city government's ability to deliver on multiple fronts. Today, I know you will hear from many residents of District 6, particularly West SOMA, who are deeply concerned about their community and frankly, extremely critical of folks in City Hall, including, frankly, me as their district supervisor. I know the role that I signed up for, and I hold no hard feelings for criticism. When I asked voters for this job, I had no expectations of escaping public scorn, certainly not in today's political environment, and certainly not with the scale of public drug addiction and related harms that are playing out in our streets at levels we have never seen before. But if I've learned anything in my career here in City Hall that goes back more than 20 years, it is that in a democracy, public accountability makes government better. So we owe nothing less to our residents than to hear their criticisms and to accept responsibility for the role we have as their representatives to act on those criticisms as best we can for the common good. Now, when I first called for this hearing, our focus was mainly the ongoing dialogue between neighbors and business owners in the West SOMA neighborhood and at HSH over a new PSH facility on Folsom Street between 7th and 8th Streets. West SOMA has experienced significant challenges in recent years since the onset of COVID. The shelter-in-place hotels, the increase in tent encampments, violent street behavior, public drug use, public drug sales, drug-driven property crime have all challenged residents and businesses like never before. This is my neighborhood too, and our community's COVID recovery is lagging behind many other neighborhoods. After the Board of Supervisors approved the acquisition of an apartment building using Project Homekey funding for 1174 Folsom Street last summer, the community began meeting with HSH in what became a lengthy and at times frustrating dialogue focused on concrete steps the city could take to address their concerns. One of the consistent requests from West SOMA residents has been for HSH to provide sufficient staffing for particularly on-site security guard staff that would be available to respond to calls from neighborhood residents or businesses about issues or concerns that arise in the new PSH facility. I appreciate and acknowledge that HSH has worked with the mayor's office successfully to secure funding for safety ambassadors for West SOMA related to this project, and I'm appreciative to HSH and to the mayor's office for that because I think it will help, but I think we're also going to hear some other things from residents today. It is my understanding from HSH that on-site security is, as a rule, not provided at PSH facilities, even those that are 100% PSH. We also know that in certain instances, HSH does agree to fund private security on a case-by-case basis, and only after considering various equitable factors. I look forward to hearing more from HSH today on what factors drive this decision-making, and I also want to understand whether there are equitable considerations taken to any factors into their account. One, existing level of crime and street conditions to specific communities. Two, existing concentration and clustering of PSH, shelter, and other public and privately operated housing, health, and other facilities that served unhoused individuals and create a cumulative impact on a particular neighborhood. And three, whether the addition of more PSH units in a community with a heavy concentration of existing services for unhoused residents will exacerbate existing community problems. We, as a city, have chosen to locate the vast majority of our response to homelessness in terms of housing and services in SOMA and adjacent communities like the Tenderloin. As a result, I would hope that HSH and other departments take these factors into consideration when making resource allocation decisions around appropriate services for PSH that will ensure the community's safety and well-being. After we introduced this hearing, we began receiving more information concerning a relatively new permanent supportive housing project in another District 6 neighborhood in Mission Bay. In October of 2022, the city opened a 141-unit PSH facility in Mission Bay operated by a nonprofit called Homerise, which up until several years ago was called Community Housing Partnership. The Mission Bay residents who contacted our office have been dealing with significant challenges generated by this newly opened PSH facility. These residents have been attempting to collaborate with Homerise and HSH to address persistent and serious quality of life and safety concerns stemming from the opening of this new facility. I don't know if we can open, there's a slide presentation. Can we open this? To give a brief overview of the magnitude of challenges this community has experienced in just the 18 months since this facility came online, I want to share some basic data provided to us by the San Francisco Police Department regarding calls for service. Between late October of 2022 and March of this year, this one building has generated 1,166 calls for city service across police, fire, medical, and other agencies. Out of these calls, there were a total of 656 police-related calls for service. Of these, 159 are Priority A calls. Priority A means present or imminent danger to life, major property damage, and/or suspects of a crime involving loss of life, serious bodily harm may be in the area, among other factors. 256 of these are Priority B calls. That means there's a potential for damage to property, the suspect may be in the area, the crime has just occurred. And Priority C calls account for 241 incidents. There's no present or potential danger, but a crime scene is protected and the suspect is no longer in the area. I would add that this building is literally adjacent to the public safety building, the police headquarters, Southern Station. This should be the safest block in town, and instead it is, honestly, it is a public nuisance. Later in this meeting, we will hear from residents in Mission Bay who have been living in the midst of these challenging conditions. These are incredibly good-hearted San Franciscans who care deeply about solving our city's problems, and I've really been impressed with the spirit that they are bringing to this. Many of them welcomed this project, albeit with reservations, but nearly all of them have expressed now legitimate concerns about the city's ability to operate these facilities. We have also invited Homerise and the Supportive Housing Providers Network to present here today. And our office has met with their staff multiple times over the last month. We look forward to hearing from these organizations and their approaches and efforts to ensure community safety is prioritized inside and outside of the facilities. And before we move on from the calls for service, I do want to note that some of these issues playing out on this permanent supportive housing facility are quite serious. They include 121 calls that involve fights, 41 assaults, 10 incidents involving gun violence, 10 incidents involving a knife. And I think we can take the slides down now. But so through the chair, before we invite our presenters, I don't know if there's any questions from colleagues. Okay, so now I guess I'd like to ask Emily Cohen, Deputy Director for Communications and Legislative Affairs with the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, to the podium to present. Thank you, Deputy Director. I appreciate you being here.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Emily Cohen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Supervisor Dorsey, before I jump into my presentation, I just want to thank you for that framing. I think we all, probably everyone in this room, wants PSH to be the best it can be for our tenants, for our operators, and for the neighbors that we live next to. And so just really want to thank you for starting us in that tone and to that end. I also want to thank the neighbors in the room and some of the residents of PSH that I see and the whole community for coming out, because I do think it will take us all to find a productive solution here and a way forward, and appreciate everyone's collaborative nature. I do want to start with a little ground setting, because through my many years of community engagement work on behalf of the department, there's often some misunderstandings. And so I want to make sure we're all starting from the same place of understanding supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing, or PSH as it's often referred to, is the most effective and evidence-based solution we have for addressing chronic homelessness. It is a robust intervention, and it is not everything. Supportive housing here in San Francisco, we have local, state, and federally funded resources within our supportive housing. Supportive housing is long-term, affordable housing with on-site social services. Tenants pay 30% of their income towards rent. They have all the rights and responsibilities of leaseholders in San Francisco. PSH, or permanent supportive housing, is not a medical facility. We do often have clinics that come into the site or nurses on site, but it is not a licensed medical facility, nor is it an institution. It is not a nursing home, it is really independent living with on-site supportive services and a deep rental subsidy for folks who have histories of homelessness. We have really focused on providing services within permanent supportive housing to people with high vulnerabilities and barriers to ending homelessness on their own. Our supportive housing portfolio in San Francisco includes over 13,000 units of housing, with about 70% or about 9,000 being site-based supportive housing, much like the two buildings you referenced in your opening remarks. We also have scattered site supportive housing that are in private market units, time-limited rental assistance, and step-up or housing ladder housing with a vacancy rate, I'm pleased to announce, near 7%. While not entirely similar, San Francisco the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing does fund navigation centers and shelters around the community. And as folks are probably aware, these also face significant scrutiny when being cited. So a Cal graduate student recently, in 2018, did a study of the impact of navigation centers, and certainly not apples to apples with supportive housing, but I do think gives us a few interesting data points. This study looked at SFPD crime data, looked at property value data, and conducted surveys with people living and working near homeless service sites. And they've essentially found that navigation centers had no to slightly positive impacts on the general community and the perception of safety. We did not see any increase in crime rates from this data. This data did not see any decrease in property values, and the perceptions of neighbors was either that things remain the same or improved slightly. When HSH goes out and works with communities to open new projects, we have been really enhancing this work over the last several years. And one of the things we have done is increase the scrutiny or enhanced our good neighbor policy in our contract with our providers. And we now have a much more robust good neighbor policy included in all contracts. And as we renew existing programs, we are adding that in. We've also established a practice of staffing and supporting community working groups of housed residents, businesses, neighborhood associations, community benefits districts, and other key community stakeholders living around our program sites. And this has been a really effective strategy to addressing community concerns head on and hopefully before they develop into patterns. And this is something we now offer in all community.
There will be no outbursts while the speaker, you have a chance for public comment, but there will be no outbursts during the speaker's presentation.
Yeah. I do want to move to safety and security to get to some of Supervisor Dorsey's more specific topics and questions. We feel, and HSH has, in collaboration with our providers and community of tenants, have really worked to enhance services in supportive housing over the past several years. We know that the acuity of people living in supportive housing has increased. We see people with more severe healthcare needs. We see older people in our housing, and we want to meet that head on by enhancing services. So we have invested $32.4 million over the last 2 years to standardize and lower the ratio of case managers to clients in supportive housing to 1 to 20 for families and youth and 1 to 25 for adults. We've improved existing infrastructure and increased the base wage for some of the key frontline service staff in supportive housing, all with the goal of ensuring that our more acute tenants can remain stably housed. In addition, we've developed really robust partnerships with the Department of Public Health, as well as the Department of Disability and Aging Services. These ongoing partnerships are focused on overdose prevention, site-based nursing, intensive case management, and roving clinical care. One program that we have recently started, a collaboration between HSH and the Department of Public Health, is the Permanent Housing Advanced Clinical Service Team, otherwise known as FACS. And FACS is working within now taking referrals from all supportive housing sites to provide more enhanced clinical care for tenants, and support for the staff operating the programs. In partnership with DOS, or the Department of Disability and Aging Services, we have expanded and are providing in-home support services to guests who need additional, or tenants, who need additional support with their activities of daily living, as well as Home Safe to provide in more intensive support for older adults and people with disabilities. And this is provided through the Adult Protective Service Department. Our safety policies and procedures within supportive housing are robust. Every permanent supportive housing site, which is operated by nonprofits, do have 24/7 staffing to ensure support with tenants, compliance with our visitor and other on-site safety policies, and to address needs as they arise. We also require all of our contracted providers to report through our critical incident reports any disruption or challenges that they might face while operating these sites. And these are reported in real time and are received by the department. We analyze these and work with each provider as we see trends emerging or issues arising. And I should say, we'll get a little bit more into CIRs in a second, critical incident reports, but the vast majority of these are for health-related emergencies. And that is to be expected. These are health-related emergencies that would have otherwise happened on the street. These are medical challenges of a very frail population that are now happening indoors. Additional safety policies and procedures, we do have a visitor policy at each site, and this is articulated through the community rules. All visitors, there are certain visiting hours and duration, like is in many of our leases, and all visitors are required to show identification and sign in at the front desk. The community rules are included in the lease that the tenant signs with the provider, and compliance with these rules is an obligation of tenancy. And that said, we do not condone or support eviction for any sort of run-of-the-mill violation of these community rules. We do work with our providers, and our providers work very closely with their tenants to try to stabilize people. Eviction is, of course, a last resort, but it is a tool that is available for these landlords. And then emergency response procedures. These are built in to every operator's operating procedures and outline when staff should call 911, when staff should escalate to an off-site manager, when staff should call the department. Things obviously like fire or violence go right to the top. And HSH, DPH, and the Department of Emergency Management do provide training for supportive housing providers on the city's crisis response teams and how to get the type of support that they are looking for when faced with an on-site crisis. I did want to give just a snapshot of the critical incident reports from across our 150 plus supportive housing portfolio from January. Again, this is just a snapshot. We see that over 50% of these calls are for health-related emergencies. About 50% of the calls incidents include a call to 911. And of those calls, 76% were for paramedic intervention. We do see the highest rate of these during sort of normal business hours, and I assume that is because of higher staffing levels during that time. But that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I expected those to be higher at night. We also, in advance of this hearing, worked with SFPD to look at crime stats around 3 recently acquired supportive housing sites. And we picked these 3, just sort of a random sample because they're in different neighborhoods. And 2 of these are youth projects, which is similar to the site we're planning to open on Folsom. And we looked at police reports and incidents 6 months prior to the opening of the project and 6 months following the opening of the project to see if there was an increase or spike in police calls, this is for reported crimes. And actually what we saw was a decrease in crime in every area that we looked at. Now, I'm not saying the permanent supportive housing caused the decrease in crime, but I think it's really strong evidence that these projects tend to have minimal impact on public safety generally. And again, the 16th Street and the Mission Street projects here are both transitional age youth projects, similar to Folsom Street. There has been a lot of questions about private security in supportive housing. Time-limited private security is a tool that can be deployed when there has been an incident or a threat. This is something we've done, on occasion when there's been threats of violence or when things at a particular site have gotten more intense. This is a decision that's made collaboratively between the provider and HSH, and the provider is able to repurpose some of their funding to pay for private security, or HSH can augment their contract slightly for this. We do not have a large fund for security, but we can help for a time-limited period with private security. Based on questions from the supervisor's office, we did look at the math and estimate that in order to provide 24/7, 3 shifts a day, on-site on-site private security at all of our supportive housing sites, this would cost between $60 and $70 million annually. And my concern with private security is often that, and I certainly think the providers can speak more to this as they operate the sites directly, is that private security guards are not trained in crisis de-escalation the way that clinical staff or other supportive housing staff likely are. They might monitor the perimeter of the building, but they cannot walk across the street and prevent an illegal activity from happening. They are very limited in sort of what the scope of what private security can do. With that said, they do provide, I think, a reassurance and a level of comfort to folks. I do think that might be felt very differently by some of our supportive housing tenants who might have had complex histories with security in the past. We have found community ambassadors to be an effective addition to our programming because they are actually out on the street engaging folks, talking to people about appropriate street behavior, and are able to intervene and escalate not just in front of our properties, but on the block. And this intervention, while again, not a silver bullet, I think is effective at improving conditions in a neighborhood for PSH operators, staff, tenants, and neighbors. And if the city were to come up with more resource for supportive housing, we would strongly recommend ambassador services as a complement to supportive housing or in any area with a high concentration of homeless services, as well as increasing investment in the social services delivered inside. As I mentioned earlier, we are seeing an increased acuity of our tenants, and I think it would go, if we are to look at a $60 to $70 million addition to our funding, I think it would be well spent on increased social services and ambassadors rather than private security. But again, I think that is the bulk of the discussion here today. And I can either take questions now or after the other presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Director Cohen. I do have a couple questions. So I know that I have done a lot with crime data, and there's a couple observations I would make about this, and I appreciate you saying that this may be a correlation, but this is not something where you can really make conclusions about causality, and that's true generally of crime data, by the way. That's not, but one thing that an observation I would make is that my understanding is most of these were opened in 2022, and that we're looking at a period of time when crime went down citywide. One other thing, a phenomenon that I think for some types of issues that have played out since in the last few years of COVID, and I think this is particularly true in my neighborhood and in West SOMA, things that would have generated a 911 call 3 or 4 years ago are now the new normal and don't. And that's why I think some of the lower level things are underreported, much like car break-ins or something. We know that in crime data, sort of the the lower you go down more into property crimes and the sort of quality of life issues, the less reliable that data is. And it is notable that citywide, and especially in the Mission and Tenderloin, there were double-digit decreases in crime in line with what we're seeing here. In terms of, I'm interested because you mentioned the issue with increased acuity. And what I'm wondering is, it feels to me that permanent supportive housing may be more expensive than we thought it was going to be. I realize that I think this is where it's incumbent on us as members of the Board of Supervisors, because we are looking at the budgets of all city departments. At the end of the day, we're responsible to taxpayers for how we're spending their money. What I would say is, we are spending money on security when we're generating close to 1,200 calls for service, or 600 plus police calls for service. We're just spending the most expensive kinds of responsive security calls from the police department, and doing it in a way that really doesn't have the benefits that a security would have of deterrence. In other words, one of the things about a 911 only security system is you're only responding to problems and investigating crimes that have happened. We're not in a situation where we're spending that money as wisely as we should. So I think it's on us to work with the department, especially if we're looking at situations where this is where the new normal is going to be increased acuity. I just wonder would you be open to, if we have to go back to the drawing board to make this successful, given what we're seeing in Mission Bay, and I fear some of the representations made to Mission Bay residents are ones that West SOMA residents are hearing now. That's a concern for all of us. So I think, do we have to go back to the drawing board and look at what we need to do for security, especially responsiveness? Because I think what I have heard from many residents is, if there's something that happens in the middle of the night, can they call somebody and get a response in the middle of the night that's not 911? So
Yes.
if you have thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. Actually, having a phone number for somebody to call and be able to reach on site 24/7 is a part of the new Good Neighbor policy that is being included in the Folsom Street project. And you would then reach somebody, again, there's 24/7 staffing at the property, and if they need to escalate to their manager or to us, they can do that. And we have protocols for escalating that type of thing. But we will be making a publicly available phone number once the site opens.
Okay. It was my understanding that we were going to cost out security at 1174 as well, and I don't know if we ever did get, if that's something that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we've costed it out at about $50 an hour.
Okay.
And so I can't do the math off the top of my head, but I could get that for you really quickly. And that is something, that we would look at. We are operating, as you know, with a finite budget for supportive housing, and this Budget and Finance Committee of this board has been very clear about the cost of some of our projects, and under an incredible amount of pressure to come in on budget. And that said, I think the debate is, where's the when we say security, what do we mean? And what is the most effective thing to provide that level of deterrence, comfort, and safety for the community? And really open to those discussions of what it is. At this point, HSH does not have the budget to either do private security or ambassadors across our program. Just this year, last year, I guess, funded one ambassador contract to cover 2 zones that had incredibly high concentrations of homeless services. Right. One was in SOMA, one was in Lower Nob Hill, and we've had some pretty mixed results with that. But I do think it has helped neighbors feel more comfortable and helped the neighborhoods get more attention. Okay.
One other thing, and I appreciate you bringing up, because there may be different solutions that when we talk about security, or there may be different ways to think about that. And some of the people I have spoken to have mentioned that maybe in something like a transitional age youth facility, an RA model where it's a peer-led kind of thing, where there's sort of a safety ambassador, somebody who would be available even if we're paying that person. And I just wonder if we also need to be looking at sort of being as creative as possible on that. So
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, completely agree. And I know Larkin Street is in the House. I'm sure they will have something to say about that during public comment.
Okay. I feel like there's something else, and I'm forgetting what I think that's it from me for now. Supervisor,
Supervisor Mandelman.
Thank you, Chair Stephanie, and thank you, Supervisor Dorsey, for calling for this hearing. And apologies for crashing, but I'm interested, and I'm particularly interested in slide 3.
Slide which?
Slide 3, which kind of breaks down what supportive housing looks like in San Francisco. And if you could just talk me through, with my colleagues' indulgence, what some of these things mean. So, site-based PSH is a building that is PSH.
Correct.
And most of our PSH then, like 70%, is in buildings where we think everyone in the building needs some level of services, or is that incorrect?
That's incorrect.
Okay.
And what I don't have here is the breakdown of buildings that are 100% PSH and buildings that are affordable with set-asides for PSH. So many
Excellent.
of the affordable buildings, and I could get that breakdown for you.
That number struck me as high and potentially problematic, because I do have growing concern about having buildings that are fully PSH. I think that the lesson, and there may be good reasons why you would want a building that's fully PSH. I actually think youth, a relatively small youth building might make a lot of sense to have it just be all youth, all coming off the streets. But if we're talking about that population that we are theoretically using PSH because, as your first or second slide says, it is the proven solution for chronic homelessness, the kind of PSH we're talking about is very intensive services, and it also seems to me that those folks tend to have very high needs, and concentrating a large number of people who may have been on the streets for a very long time, who may have a host of mental health issues and a set of addiction challenges, is hard on the staff in those buildings, is hard on the people who are living in those buildings, is hard on the neighborhood around those buildings. And if we were doing that with 70% of our site-based PSH, I would be very worried, but I'm still concerned and would like to follow up with HSH to better understand how much of our PSH portfolio is that scenario that I have just described, because it may be a lot less than I think it is, but I'm concerned about it. Scattered site PSH means you've got some units around the city that are in buildings that are not affordable at all, and that seems like the best way to do it, although hard. And 13% being rapid rehousing would mean those are units we've set aside, just you're coming from the street and immediately going, or what is rapid rehousing?
So rapid rehousing is a time-limited rental subsidy. So the tenant is renting housing in the private market, paying a portion of their income towards rent, and has a guaranteed subsidy for 2 years.
Okay, but it's PSH because we're connecting it with, so we have some kind of
Because we have services.
component.
So often for both the scattered site PSH and rapid rehousing, case managers are available. They'll meet you in your unit or in the community.
Okay. And what does it mean to be housing ladder?
Housing ladder is a small portion of our portfolio where people essentially, for lack of a better word, graduate from supportive housing after 2 years of being in PSH. They've stabilized, their health conditions are more under control, and they may still need the affordability of their PSH unit, but they don't need the support services. So they have an opportunity to apply for housing that has fewer support services, but that underlined affordability.
Okay.
And that can either be project-based or scattered site.
Okay. That's helpful for me. I'm going to quibble just for a sec. I don't disagree with this point, but I just think it's worth dwelling. I think most of your presentation acknowledges that this is a little more complicated than the statement that you began your presentation with, which is permanent supportive housing is the most effective and evidence-based solution to chronic homelessness. And I think that has been demonstrated by studies, And a lot of those studies are studies that have infinite resources to provide that allow people to fall out of their housing placement repeatedly. And rather than the situation that we have so often with someone in a placement, unsuccessful, creating chaos, gets evicted, back on the streets, these studies have that same person, but when they're creating chaos and not able to make it in one placement, they don't end up evicted or back on the street or whatever. They end up in the next placement, and we try it a different way with different services, and then we do it again, and at some point it sticks. And that does work, and may work better than institutionalization works from a perspective of getting someone off the streets, but it's not ideal. This other thing you can do, if we can do it, is better than institutionalization. And it also, this point I think is made to the people who say like, oh, no, there's some kind of ladder. You got to get someone into shelter first, and then this, and then that, the other. And if you provide the right level of services and you're able to do it, you can get the drug treatment done with someone in their home. You can get them through. And if you're really working with them right, at some point maybe they don't need permanent supportive housing, or some people may need it for the rest of their lives, but whatever. If you have the resources, you can really make this work. But if you don't, then you got problems. And I think what your other slides show is HSH recognizing that and trying to get the additional resources to make it a little bit more like those studies that tell us that PSH works. And for a lot of people, it plainly, even in our underfunded system, it works. We just have some folks who probably need a lot more resource than we're getting them right now. You look like you want to say something to that.
Supervisor, I very much agree with a lot of what you just said. And in conversations with folks who live in supportive housing, as well as the operators of supportive housing, I think we would estimate that there's probably about 5% of supportive housing tenants who need something higher, who are not appropriately placed, if you will. And this is where we really need PSH Plus or another level at boarding cares. We need another level of service. And when those other levels of service don't exist, permanent supportive housing becomes the housing that is available in the highest quantity for people in crisis. And those 5%, it's a small number, and it is, I think, a number that we can accommodate in a higher level of care with the right investments. And those 5% are disruptive. I think we hear about the issue in Mission Bay, and we know that that is a very small handful of tenants causing an outsized amount of stress on the community and on the operator. And I think, we know that, again, it's an estimate of 5%, but I think if we could solve for that 5%, our entire portfolio would be far more stabilized. And we are going to be at the Homeless Oversight Commission in a week talking about an enhanced care supportive housing project that we are rolling out in the next few weeks or next few months. So excited to test it out here.
Yeah. And I do think, some of this problem just goes back to the statement that all PSH is not created equal. Absolutely. And all PSH is not the solution for every single person's problems. The types of, I have been arguing for a while, that there's investments that you need to make on the very low end for someone just to get that person off of the sidewalk tonight. And there are investments that you need to be making at the high end, because we've been losing board and cares like crazy in this city and in California generally. And there are people who are going to need, for a short or long-term basis, much more support than they're getting even in the enhanced PSH. And I just want us to be thinking about that as we think about things like our Prop C dollars. I think your NAV Center study is interesting, but also points out there is a difference, I think, or I'm curious, there may be a difference between how the commitments that we make to neighbors around a NAV Center and the commitments that we make to neighbors around a permanent supportive housing building, or have made historically to neighbors around a permanent supportive housing building. The deal we've sort of made around shelter, I think, and we don't always live up to this, but around NAV centers, and at least in the time that I've been on the Board of Supervisors, and I think it was before then as well, was to some extent we're going to use this facility that we put into your neighborhood to make the rest of the neighborhood better. We're going to work on getting folks off the sidewalk into this tiny home village or this nav center or whatever it is. We're going to step up police resources, DPW resources. We're kind of going to, really focus those resources on what honestly has been a relatively small number of nav centers, right? We haven't done that many. We've done a lot more PSH buildings. And I don't know that we think about them in the same way as primarily a way to pull folks off the sidewalks in that neighborhood and to improve conditions in the area around. I'm not sure that we should, because I'm not sure that's how we want to use PSH. It's not consistent with our one system criteria, I don't think, nor necessarily should it be. But it creates a sort of an apples to oranges of like, those nav centers are not like, and paradoxically, you might get more neighborhood benefit over what would seem like a higher impact use, like a nav center, than permanent housing.
Absolutely. The ability to use navigation centers as a tool to help support the community as a whole, including obviously the unhoused members of that community, is higher than it is for housing. But on the other side of that coin, you're also talking usually about more people. The navigation center, right, Folsom is a 42-unit building that we're talking about here. Nav Center in Embarcadero is 200 beds. There's a different scale, and there's a different level of crisis that the guests versus tenants are in. When someone's first coming off the street into a navigation center, you're likely to see just more chaos in their lives than someone who's been on this pathway for housing for some time, and it's likely not quite as big of a transition.
And based on that, we might not have as much chaos resource for that.
Correct.
For that building. I guess last question I would ask then is, and I'm interested in learning more about how many of the buildings in our portfolio are 100% top to bottom PSH for adults. Is HSH, and HSH is trying to create new programs that'll have more resource for high needs people in PSH. Is there any thought about deconcentrating some of the buildings that we have now? And these SRO buildings, before we, in the pre-Care Not Cash days, my impression was, not housing of first resort for most people, but a place where lots of different kinds of people found housing of last resort. And it might have been folks with some severe needs, mental illnesses, people who were consistently behind on the rent, people on welfare or whatever. But it was also like the immigrant family, the senior who has no money. There was like lots of different kind of people in that building. Is there thought about working with our broader housing portfolio to have these buildings start looking more like other kinds of affordable housing, where we have just some plain old or young poor folks who need subsidized rent, along with some folks who really have needs?
Absolutely. So this is very complicated in implementation. So there's two types of deconcentration I think that we're looking at. One is geographic deconcentration, and as we've added more buildings to our supportive housing portfolio through acquisition, we've actually really been intentional about we've acquired one in the Tenderloin that's currently operating as a shelter and will convert to supportive housing. The other buildings that we have acquired have very intentionally been outside of the Tenderloin because we are trying to achieve some deconcentration. And I fully recognize that West SOMA has more of a lot of things, not just housing, but shelter and drug treatment and a number of other type of city facilities. And then there's the deconcentration right within the project. And this is something we talk about a lot because as we've seen acuity grow, as you indicated, we have seen these sites become harder. And so when we fund something through the local LOSP, Local Operating Subsidy Program, through MoCD, those projects are partially supportive housing and partially affordable housing. And if Dylan can look up our LOSP portfolio, I don't know, I could get you the number by the end of this hearing. Those are all more mixed income. Yeah. And then the ones where we are the sole funder, because our funding is dedicated to supportive housing and homeless housing, that's where we see in our master lease portfolio or our continuum of care, which is federally funded, that's where you see 100% PSH buildings.
And
It's often a color of money
number
challenge.
of those.
Oh, very many.
And
very
it might
many.
be worth the city figuring out how to get MoCD and HSH working together on both expanding the overall portfolio, but reducing the number of buildings that are fully PSH.
Yeah. The vast majority of the buildings that are newly constructed are mixed income.
Okay.
But it's the older.
I mean, I'm going to ask what I think is an obvious question, but I would assume the reports, the calls for service, the reports of challenges from those buildings. I mean, sure, there may be some folks who are really high needs and a challenge and who the management struggles with, and neighbors struggle with, but like, I would assume those are easier buildings for I don't know.
Yeah, I
Who
haven't
knows?
looked. I
Okay.
couldn't speak to that data, but maybe some of the operators in the room
Well,
could.
all right. I'm interested in this conversation. We can continue it.
Just a quick announcement. We have overflow seating in room 263. So if you cannot find a seat in the chambers, you may proceed to room 263. But please find a seat or move to the overflow room. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Deputy Director Cohen. And now through the chair, I'd like to invite up from the Supportive Housing Provider Network, Lauren Hall, for a few minutes. And just for those here, not every presenter is going to be as long as the department, but I appreciate people taking a few minutes to lend their perspectives as well. Ms. Hall, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Lauren Hall. I'm a San Francisco homeowner, and I'm the co-chair of the Supportive Housing Provider Network. SHPN is a network of PSH providers that operate over 11,000 units of PSH in San Francisco. We provide housing for adults, families, seniors, veterans, and youth. And like our unhoused population, PSH residents are overrepresented by BIPOC folks who would otherwise be priced out of San Francisco. PSH sites have been successfully operating in Mission Bay and south of Market since the very first developments were established there over 20 years ago. Our residents are as much the fabric of this community as any of us here today. I'm a little concerned some of the nature of this hearing suggests sort of an othering of people that live in supportive housing. And I just want to say that there are thousands of supportive housing residents here in the district that we're discussing that are thriving and doing well in 100% PSH sites. Safety is an issue in many neighborhoods in San Francisco. It's dangerous to assert that any one group of people is responsible or that safety is not a responsibility of an entire community, as well as multiple departments in the city. Post-pandemic safety has been a greater concern in communities all over the city. To that end, SHPN has created a safety subcommittee to consider the ways that we can improve safety for residents, staff, neighbors, and visitors to our PSH sites. We recognize this is not just the job of providers or HSH, and so that committee meets regularly with HSH, Department of Public Health, Department of Emergency Management, and SFPD to strategize about investments and policy change that will benefit our residents and neighbors who are impacted by unsafe street conditions. We understand as operators it is our role to create welcoming and safe environments for residents and staff, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We have practices in place to balance community well-being and individual tenant responsibilities. Our residents are also tenants and residents of these communities. They're entitled to due process if their behavior is in conflict with the lease. And we are also reliant on public safety systems to address negative behaviors, and we cannot do the work of law enforcement. If police don't respond to concerns that we have on site, we have very little recourse. We welcome the partnership with our neighbors, but we would want to ensure that this collaboration does not suggest that people who qualify for supportive housing as a whole are not welcome in these neighborhoods. To advance our work on safer communities, SHPN has continually advocated for greater investments in safety. Last year, we asked for $4 million for enhanced security investments, including investments in community building, expanded service programs, expansion of the neighborhood ambassador programs, and as needed, security guards for more acute issues. HSH was allocated $1 million, a quarter of that request. These funds are available to providers in response to crisis situations, but are not the path to overall thriving communities. And I will say, as we've talked about, it is supportive housing, but it's also important to note that it's intended for people who can thrive in a voluntary service model. That said, we are committed in San Francisco to providing opportunities for individuals who are challenged with their current situation on the streets and need more support than what our teams are set up to provide. As HSH presented, investments have been made to support higher acuity residents, and the city's Home by the Bay strategic plan lays out that strategy to address those needs. But again, there are challenges with addressing higher levels of acuity that are present, but they're part of the larger system of care. And as housing providers, we work to navigate that, and we would really welcome the support of the board in ensuring that safety net services are readily available and that we have a real conversation about what we're seeing in supportive housing. I don't share the concern that 100% PSH is necessarily problematic. 9 sites that I operate are all 100% PSH. They're thriving communities. As we've discussed, there's a portion of folks who may need a higher level of services, but to sort of blanket that all of PSH residents have that same level of need or are disruptive to the community is really a disservice to that community. And we have an opportunity here to work together instead of sort of pitting community members against each other. I think our focus should really be around prevention, not just responding to them. Research has demonstrated that greater investments in community as opposed to greater investments in policing are effective for creating safer communities. It's our opinion on PSH that 24/7 private security across the portfolio is not necessary, and we don't believe it will address some of these concerns that are coming up. We think it would divert much needed resources that could be invested in lifting these communities, and we would like to see that conversation be in a more nuanced way as opposed to in a hearing. But there are over 140 PSH sites in San Francisco, as Emily noted. The vast majority of them operate without complaints, and those communities are thriving. As operators of those sites and as people who spend a lot of time in those buildings and are very deeply connected with our residents, we have a vested interest in adopting measures that prevent safety incidents and improving neighborhoods. We would welcome the opportunity to work with you to come up with strategies that accomplish our collective goals around safety, but we really don't want to stand for policies that suggest that our collective need to invest in safer communities is the responsibility of supportive housing providers or HSH alone. And more importantly, we don't want to elevate rhetoric that further marginalizes these communities that we are deeply committed to serving. So thanks for the opportunity. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk more about the work that we do.
Great. Seeing no one on the roster, through the chair, I'd appreciate your time.
Thanks.
That's all. And through the chair, next up, I'd like to welcome Nikki Amati, a resident of SOMA West, to provide some remarks.
Hello. My name is Nikki Amadi, a resident of SOMA West. As you mentioned, while I'm here as an individual, I am representing an entire community of West SOMA, or SOMA West, and that includes hundreds of us. To convey the seriousness of the issues before us in SOMA, I offer a summary of recent community correspondence, which is on top of our petition initiated on May 12, 2023. This petition has gained 1,300 signatures. In this petition, residents express concerns about the housing project's concentration in District 6, highlighting a disparity in the distribution of supportive housing throughout San Francisco. Just to let you know, there are over 900 units of supportive housing within blocks of 1174 Folsom. And now, back to the summary of our most recent thread. This thread includes a series of impassioned emails from us, the residents of West SOMA, expressing deep concerns and frustrations over the proposed 1174 Folsom project. We argue that this project, along with the presence of supportive housing, clinics, and a potential safe injection site, will harm the neighborhood's diverse and vibrant community. The recent incidents at Bay of Burma and the pervasive lawlessness in our neighborhood underscores a crisis that can no longer be ignored. It is disheartening and infuriating that despite repeated appeals, the response from city officials and law enforcement has been grossly inadequate. Our community is unraveling at an alarming rate, and yet we find ourselves questioning. What would it take for you to start listening? Must we wait for the unthinkable, like the murder of children in our streets, before we see meaningful intervention? We highlight the impact on local businesses, particularly the immigrant-owned Bay of Burma, which today faces closure due to the project's implications. Despite months of communication attempts with city officials and HSH, the community feels our concerns have been largely ignored. The emails critique the city's apparent double standards, contrasting the quick termination of a similar project in Chinatown with a prolonged process in SOMA, suggesting a lack of equitable treatment across neighborhoods. We, the residents, believe city officials and HSH lack empathy, transparency, and a fair process, pointing to the substantial negative effects on small business owners, children, seniors, and the overall fabric of the community. We demand more meaningful engagement, support, and reconsideration of the project, emphasizing the needs for safety, support for the local economy, and equitable treatment of all neighborhoods. The thread reflects a community united in opposition to a project we believe will destroy the essence of SOMA West, seeking immediate and substantial action from city leaders. Adding to this, the communication highlights a disturbing narrative of neglect and disregard by city official and HSH over the span of 10 months, during which the city has seemingly accomplished little to address the community's concerns. The treatment of Bay of Burma as a case study exemplifies what the community views as an anti-immigrant bias towards small businesses, coupled with the broader issue of pushing out families and seniors, arguably the most vulnerable population. The residents depict SOMA West as the containment zone for the city's most challenging problems, demonstrating a systematic failure to distribute social services and challenges equitably across the city. This narrative serves to amplify the community's call for immediate, effective, and empathetic action from HSH, Mayor London Breed, and Supervisor Matt Dorsey, underscoring the urgent need for a reversal of the city's current trajectory concerning the 1174 Folsom project and its impact on the SOMA West community. While we're not opposed to the notion of supportive housing, our advocacy is for inclusive housing solutions that cater to the needs of all residents, not just those shooting up on our streets with zero contribution to our local economy.
Nikki, hold on. Can I just hold on? Through the chair, I just want to remind everybody here that the rules of the Board of Supervisors is that there's not to be audible participation. If you want to express yourself for happy, you can do this, or thumbs up or thumbs down. I was deliberate in the beginning of this, making sure that we are going to honor a tone that is solutions-focused. The residents here have a right to express their grievances. That is a constitutional right in this country, and we're going to honor it in the Board of Supervisors. So I would ask everybody here to please respect the residents, and the residents to respect the advocates. We can have a respectful conversation, and we can make progress, and in fact, the only way we're going to make progress is to have a respectful conversation. Nikki, I apologize.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Dorsey. The neighborhood's decline is accelerating, and with each passing day, we are witnessing the erosion of our safety, security, and the vitality that once defined our community. This is not just a failure of policy, but a failure of responsibility. And now we ask, what will it take for you to act? Must we face even more heartbreaking tragedies before you recognize the severity of the situation? The eyes of SOMA West are upon you, waiting for you to prove that our safety, lives, and livelihood matters to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mahdi. Seeing nobody with questions, next up, I would like to ask Marcel Davis, Interim Director for Resident Services with Homerise. This Homerise is the service provider for the Mission Bay project, which is also known as sometimes MB9. Yep.
Thank you, Supervisor Dorsey, for having us here today. Me as a representation of my organization to have this much needed discussion. And that is where solutions rise. Just as a note, my name is Marcel Davis. I am Director of Resident Services for Homerise. I've been working directly with my colleagues and neighbors of Madrone and John. We forged a great relationship. We're building relationships even with other neighbors, through the Arlene's, the Mays, to where I respond to emails 7 days a week, just in doing exactly what she stated out. I really appreciate that tone setting of coming up with solutions. This is where it starts. In my presentation today, I'm just going to chronicleize Homerise in the neighborhoods of Madrone's interactions the last 8 months, and just kind of leave an update as to where we're at currently, what's working, what's changing, what's gotten better. As our mission statement, Homerise's mission is to help people experiencing homelessness secure housing and become more self-sufficient through permanent supportive housing. The Homerise philosophy, we believe that given adequate and tailored support, all people possesses the capacity to achieve a high degree of self-sufficiency. Just some background information regarding to MB9, and this is real important as we highlight the 2022 dates. This is post-COVID as we speak to high acuity in folks coming straight out of SIP hotels, our shelter-in-place hotels. Mission Bay 9 opened in 2022. San Francisco Department of Housing and Homelessness referred to all residents to fill the 144 units from SIP sites. So just for folks who are not familiar with that, these are folks who came to this great city of San Francisco seeking sanctuary during COVID and who stayed. In August 2023, our CEO, Janaea Jackson, received an email from law enforcement and also an ally of ours and supporter, Captain Martin, about noise violence coming from some of our disruptive residents. On September 26, we began to meet monthly with representatives from both Homerise, but also Madrone, local police department, SHH, who's been a great partner in this, and other stakeholders. Steps were taken immediately after this. This is where we created a platform where we just received and vetted a lot of Madrone residents, I would say understandable, observations and things that we were quite frankly either unaware of or concerned about. Addressing the complaint by addressing the complaint about individuals loitering near our building. We installed a no loitering sign within 30 days after receiving this feedback, just as a measure of responsiveness. We had a Homerise resident place furniture and trash on a sidewalk, causing disrupted. We properly contacted 311, 911, addressed the resident's behavior, and escalated the situation. Michael has since vacated the property. He's no longer a resident at Homerise. Captain Morgan have been held to address ongoing support, particularly concerning incidents occurring outside of our building. These discussions revolved around exploring ways to establish and enforce new rules. That's me being one of those rules. 24-hour, 48 response to any complaints made on China Basin. Just within that window, while I take on all my other duties, supporting my staff who's also here in attendance, and as well as the residents. We have implemented changes to access our community space and have actively encouraged our residents to utilize it instead of congregating outside in front of the building. So just background, there's a lot of observations about loitering. We kindly escalated, and residents now are hanging out in other parts of the building. At each subsequent meeting, our Madrone neighbors presented a list of concerns along with the mutually agreed upon actions from each session. And this is kind of just a clock here. And some of the listings here, I do have 20 residents who are here with me today, and I feel responsible to just highlight them. This is not a reflection of the 97%. And they are here with me. We only have 3% who is high acute right now. So as I read this off, just in sensitivity to them, I do want to just thank them for being here. And this is not a reflection of what they do every day and what they mean to us as an agency. Just going through the items, you can see categorized violence and aggression. We addressed, there was a resident who was masturbating. You'll see signs, you'll actually see video footage today of that resident who's no longer a resident anymore. Through not only de-escalation, I will also say in conjunction with the Madrone residents heightening our awareness, we're able to find some alternative housing that didn't lead to an eviction, right, a solution. We had a resident here who drug dealing, goes by the name of Ohio. And I want to be clear, just for the sake of even our acute, these are not real given names, code names established by both Homerise and Madrone residents, just so that we have a point of reference. Madrone's known as a known drug dealer. We've done plenty of things to keep him off site, including MB9 personnel call when he's on site or in the loading area, and he immediately having this previously. Again, he's not a resident, he's a visitor, having this community member escorted off our property. Disruptive ruckus behavior, and this I want to speak to personally because I know this tenant, the screaming woman from the window, which I find hard to relate to a human. But having said that much, high acute has been self-identified as schizophrenia. Lots of disturbances on the weekends that, like I said, from the help with the Madrone residents have brought to my attention. We've de-escalated in several different ways, mainly just relying on our resources, but also in the moment, things that are on the ledge. We have safety concerns with things being thrown out. 911 is involved, and we are actively working with this resident, not only as like a disruptive, but coming up with a holistic response. I would just say in protection of just her own rights, we have not shared everything with the Madrone residents, what's going on there. And I think that's where I think as a supporter, a housing provider, it's confused on exactly what our role is between Madrone and Homerise staff. Homerise has been diligent in their response in addressing our neighbors' concern, yet our neighbors have been asked to provide relevant information and dates of incidents and have not followed through all the time. Not all the time, most of the time. We're still waiting for those details. Our neighbors seem reluctant to accept and understand the boundaries of what Homerise can and cannot do when violence and possible criminal behaviors occur. 100%, I would say that. But I would say Madrone much more with curiosity, not as I wouldn't say as dismissively not understanding what we're doing, but not just don't understand the scope of our duties. And this was evident when we all sat at the tables and also in the community rooms of MB9 and had our recent meeting there, along with SHH, which went really well, bringing the Madrone neighbors into the site where I felt like there were solutions in that room, and I still feel like they're still there. Homerise has been diligent in their response. Our neighbors seem to be reluctant to acknowledge that residents in PHH buildings are not individually selected by each provider, but are instead referred through the coordinated entry system. And that was stated earlier, right? Just a break in a system here that can get better. But rather than undermining the mayor and her attempts to solve this complicated issue around public supportive housing and homelessness, we're in here trying to find out other alternatives. And I love the holistic suggestions around ambassadors and peers. I think that's a great one. Homerise must abide by fair housing, tenant protection, laws, local evictions. Our residents are entitled to the same protections and considerations as anyone else in all matters related. That just means we can't tell you when someone's getting evicted, right? The Madrones residents have asked with curiosity. We're not in charge of that, right, in terms of just the backlog of what this county's dealing with all evictions across the city. So more patience and grace around that as we work as dual agents to solve these problems. This is a mental resource issue. Homerise believe that these issues we are currently facing with 3% of our residents are not unique to our shared neighborhood or our agency. It's important to acknowledge 97% of our residents live successfully at MB9. I would ask for those residents to please stand if you benefit from MB9 who joined me today. Please stand with me and just showing your faces and thanking you for joining me. And this is why we do it. Our model's working. Definitely need to improve some things, but I think it's great to give a voice to those who are thriving in place. Homerise will persist in addressing disruptive issues at MB9 by utilizing all available resources. Moreover, we believe that identifying sustainable long-term solutions requires engaging in discussions with the city and the supportive housing provider network. Lauren, thank you so much, to explore more effective methods for referring, serving, and addressing the necessities of San Francisco neighbors with high acuity of care needs who require and benefit from permanent supportive housing. Thanks for the opportunity to just speak for those who don't have the opportunity to speak as much. And I'm hoping we do find something holistic in this great city of San Francisco.
I am too. Thank you so much, Mr. Davis. I want to there was a line that you mentioned that more patience and grace, and I really appreciate that's something that I'm gonna steal that line because I think that's what how we find solutions. So thank you for your participation, and to the people who are here who benefit from permanent supportive housing, just know that this is close to my heart. I have not been a resident of permanent supportive housing, but I have been in residential settings for drug treatment on a few occasions in my life, and I know that this is the kind of thing that can change and improve lives. So I'm not giving up on it, and I appreciate the spirit with which you brought to that. And finally, I think our final presenter is Deanna Terzian, a Mission Bay resident, to the podium.
Hi, I've lived in Mission Bay for 12 years, and I'm speaking on behalf of the hundreds of neighbors that leave.
The slides are there.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm speaking on behalf of the hundreds of neighbors that live in the immediate vicinity of the Homerise Mission Bay location. We believe in permanent supportive housing. However, we feel that this specific location, the location at Homerise Mission Bay, has been poorly executed, and it is causing a great deal of pain for neighbors and Homerise tenants. According to the police data, as you already heard, at this specific Homerise location, in the past 14 months, there have been more than 1,000 calls to the city, including more than 600 police calls. That's an average of 50 police calls per month at this one location. These problems are serious. There's fistfights, there's violence, there's drug dealing. Neighbors have been methodically reporting these issues to Homerise management and HSH monthly over the past 6 months, but virtually no progress has been made. Neighbors are scared, they're hurting, and they're frustrated because this has been going on for 15 months. We are here because, frankly, we are desperate for concrete actions, and we're asking for your help. I want to share the severity of the incidents we're experiencing, not to focus on specific incidents or individuals, but to focus on the patterns. We're seeing a pattern of violence and aggression. If you look at the photos in the top right, you see fistfights, brawls with weapons. These are happening right outside Homerise's entrance. And according to the police data, there is a fight happening about once every 3 days. The bottom photo shows a tenant who publicly masturbates at the entrance of a neighboring building where families with children regularly enter and exit. Families are afraid to enter their own building, and this has persisted for months. The next pattern we're seeing is open drug dealing. Homerise tenants and their guests are openly dealing drugs. Cars pull up, purchase their drugs, and this is happening right in front of Homerise's entrance, and it has been happening for months. There are continually loud and raucous gatherings in front of Homerise entrance. This is primarily happening in the evenings and weekends. There is a Homerise tenant who for 4+ months has been screaming for hours out her open window day and night. Neighbors can't work, they can't sleep, even with their windows closed, and again, this has persisted for months. There are building safety and health issues. I want to point out that the picture you see on this slide is of a tenant who repeatedly breaks his window and also exposes himself to neighbors in direct line of sight with families with children that live in direct line of sight. I want to show a map of Homerise because I think this is really important. I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but the white box in the middle is the Homerise building, and the entrance is right directly close to the street. Most of the incidents that I have spoken about today are happening within 40 feet of the Homerise entrance. You can also see the neighboring buildings very close. That is such a small area to manage. Let's talk about engagement with Homerise management. For the first 9 months of 2023, Homerise refused to even engage with neighbors. It was only after repeated attempts by the police to reach out to Homerise and the involvement of the city attorney did Homerise agree to engage with neighbors. Since that time, since October 2023, we have had monthly sit-downs where neighbors methodically present the issues with pictures, with videos, with dates, and even with names if they're known, and we ask Homerise to take specific action. After 6 months of monthly meetings, we've seen virtually no progress. Unlike what was presented just previously, Homerise has never asked us to follow up with specific information. We are the ones collecting that information and providing it to them, but we've seen very few actions taken, and the problems persist. I also want to talk about HSH and its role in the problems at this location. During the planning process with Mission Bay, HSH made promises and assurances, and those promises were not kept. HSH promised 24/7 security, and that has not happened. We have had inadequate security at this location for the past 15 months. HSH made a promise that there would be a thorough screening of tenants at this location. They assured neighbors that that tenants would understand lease requirements, that they were capable of living independently. That screening process has clearly failed at this location. It has not been honored. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 1,000 calls to the city and more than 600 calls to the police. As neighbors, we would like to know what exactly was HSH's screening criteria for this specific location. We have asked HSH this monthly for months, and they still have not provided a clear answer. Now, after 15 months, as I said, neighbors are scared, they're hurting, they're frustrated. We really need your help to help with some concrete steps that can address these issues we're facing. Number one, Homerise can help by doing the following. They can move the extremely disruptive tenants to other units in the building that do not face families with children. Number two, they can enforce the no loitering, no trespassing policy, which is not consistently enforced, especially in the evenings and on the weekends when most problems occur. Again, as I said previously, most of these incidents are happening within 40 feet of Homerise's entrance. Number two, we need 24/7 security at this specific location. Having security at the entrance will do a lot to deter the type of behavior that we're seeing, because their presence absolutely reduces incidents. This is not about comfort. This is, we understand that they can't stop crime, but their presence will deter incidents happening. I want to mention something related to HSH's presentation. They showed crime numbers for new locations, but specifically, they did not include this Mission Bay location. And it's 1,000 service calls and more than 600 police calls. That's a dramatic increase in crime in this neighborhood since the location opened. For this location, 24/7 security is absolutely warranted and it's needed. We believe HSH's poor screening at this location makes this a requirement. Number three, we need HSH to enact an urgent relocation policy and move serious repeat offenders out of the Mission Bay location. Evictions take a year plus. Tenants exposing themselves to families with children for more than a year is not something that should be tolerated. Number four, HSH broke their promise through screening about thorough screening at this location. We would like to know, how will HSH fix this? Finally, I just want to say that we believe in permanent supportive housing, and we believe that implementation matters. Fixing this location of Homerise at Mission Bay is critical because we need a model that can work successfully across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. It's with us. Not audible. Thank Ms. Terzian, thank you so much. I don't have any comments, but I do appreciate your perspective, and I will return this back to the chair.
Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can you please open this up for public comment?
Yes, members of the public who wish to speak on this item should line up now along the side by the windows. All speakers will have 2 minutes to speak. Can the first speaker come forward?
Good morning, supervisors.
Sure. I think
I'm going to reset your time.
Can everyone please settle down and be quiet so we can start with public comment? Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the hearing. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Again, we're sitting here pre-COVID with the same problems. So to answer, does something need to be done about restructuring HSH? Hell yes, right? We're talking about impacts of permanent supportive housing. Can we remember that we're out of COVID? We're in a new era of history. San Francisco's not alone in this systemic problem. We need to address that mental health, according to our governor, is 1 in 4. We have pandemic of fentanyl, and you continue to blame it on low-income, marginalized populations. What are you doing about mental health to eliminate all these problems? What are you doing with $32,000 for case management ratio 1 to 25? That should de-escalate your problems. Why do you want to pay a case manager $19.99 an hour to $26 and pay a security guard $50 that can do nothing for one's self-agency? What are you going to do? It's not about housing. It's about mental health. It's about a pandemic of intentionally killing our people. Flip the dialogue. We're not in Kansas anymore. Nobody's taking care of the trauma after 2020. That's affecting all of us. Open your lens and start looking at a community-based approach. Do something about mental health and you would eliminate all these problems. You ignore it, you're sitting on it, and it's rampant, and it's a problem. Again, I want to look at the case management cost. I want to know, for 7 years I've been asking for case management ratio to client-centered care. Why you still got $32,000 and no evidence of evidence-based practice that it's working? And don't think that this is happening in public housing alone. It's happening in our city because of mental health challenges.
Okay, speaker time has elapsed. Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Miller, and I'm happy to be here today.
Just as a note, for the record, Jacqueline asked me to stand with her.
Okay. This is March the 28th, 2024, at City Hall in San Francisco, California, where I never had a chance to say anything. Hi, my name is Jacqueline Miller. I have been a resident all my life as a drug addict. I grew up not knowing myself. I grew up not knowing my true self at all. I thank God for all He has done for me. My life has been full of sorrow, but thank God for blessing me down through the years. I love a man. I love such a man that one hope and happiness, no more pain, that I just can't get over. Thanking my boss, Mr. Hugo, and Mr. Pete, how they have shown me you cannot throw dollars at problems, but let me help you, and I am still seeking for change in the community. Thank you, Homerise, for welcoming me in with hot meals and working with staff to help change to a better place to live, something I never dreamed of having. Thank you, God. Stay positive, stay humble, don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hello, thank you, supervisors. My name is Amit Desai. I'm a neighbor very close to Homerise, and I'm also part of the working team that sits monthly with Homerise and HSH and prepares a lot of documentation to sit down to resolve these issues and request action items. I would like your help. I think we absolutely support permanent supportive housing for all the good that it does. And as we heard, execution matters. And I think the Homerise Mission Bay location is somehow a special case that needs and deserves special attention For whatever reason, and we think it is tied to the screening criteria by HSH that was used, we have a very difficult situation for the neighbors and, by the way, for the Homerise tenants alike. Folks inside Homerise are just as affected as we are by the 1,000 service calls, the 600 police calls. These are monstrous numbers, and the fights are happening to the Homerise tenants as well as on the streets. And therefore, this is a very special case from the neighbor's perspective, warrants and deserves special needs like 24/7 security. I think the fact that this is within 40 feet of the building entrance, if we had 24-hour security there, it would deter so much and do so much good for the neighbors as well as for the residents of Homerise. I'd like to mention that we, including myself, some of us spent 20 hours a week preparing all the documentation and sitting very methodically with Homerise management and HSH. We devote a lot of our time because we don't want, like a chaotic, like food fight type of discussion, but rather a very methodical one. We just haven't seen much progress, almost no progress in so long. And I would remind us that it took us 9 months in 2023 before Homerise would even engage.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, thank you very much for letting us come and speak. My name is Arlene Singer. I live at the Madrone across the street from Homerise, and I want to tell you this breaks my heart. What's going on there in terms of a small number of people causing a huge problem for us is really heartbreaking. In 2017, when I learned about the PSH on China Basin Street, where my wife and I enter and exit daily, as an elderly person, I was concerned about how it might impact me, so I attended a number of meetings with HSH and OCII, where they personally assured me that the PSH residents would not be disruptive or danger to us. They would be carefully vetted, and that security, case management, and mental health professionals would be available in there. At a City Hall meeting, a hearing here at City Hall, I asked that they move the entrance off of China Basin, directly across from where I come in and out, to either Bridgeview or over onto Mission Rock, and that was denied. And since Homerise is next to police headquarters, I just assumed we'd be fine. I was wrong. Every concern I had has come to be because of a small number of residents. I've gotten to know those people there, and the vast majority of them are wonderful people, and I'm very proud to say I live there, except for what's been going on in terms of public disruption and fear. I'm afraid our safe and quiet street is disrupted almost daily. I'm going to try to make this really fast. I have two requests. One, hire and empower sufficient staff on a 7/24 basis. Please don't tell us to call 911 to report problems with their residents. It's not our responsibility. And the second, enforce leases, quiet hours, and no loitering rules. Improve there are consequences for violating them by establishing an expedited eviction process for repeat offenders. In the meantime, relocate the worst offenders who are creating a terrible situation and simultaneously continue the eviction process. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, thank you, supervisors. My name is Patrick Egan, and I'm a homeowner. I raised two young daughters. Supervisor Dorsey, you've met both, age 3 and 8. And I live right next door to 1174 Folsom, also a proud member of SOMA West Community Benefit District. I consciously chose to raise my daughters in such a diverse and open-minded neighborhood. I want them to be exposed to the urban environment. To dispel a myth, my neighbors who are with me today, we're very compassionate and empathetic. But we all might have different political orientations and come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but I've never seen our neighborhood more unified on one front against 1174 due to the flawed process. We are simple residents asking for simple things. I have two perplexing questions. Why is SOMA West the containment zone for all this supportive housing? Why? With zero investment back from the community or city, And over 10 months, question 2, Why must HSH and the city literally ignore all our requests, be obstructionists for simple requests like 24/7 security, finally addressed 10 months later today? This is an unhinged project in 1174 with no simple safeguards. The current neighborhood good neighbor policy is toothless. There was no mention of Mission Bay Homerise in any of the prior conversations. Let me tell you a personal story. This is my day, the rite of passage. In the morning, Sumner Street, I have to clear the addicts doing fentanyl because my children can't walk to school being exposed to that. 2, at night, seniors call me on Sumner because of the noise and the fentanyl addiction and abuse outside. And 3, Bay of Burma, Kay is in the back. She has been bullied by this city and HSH specifically, and that is a disservice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your comments. We just want to remind all to not engage in clapping or sound in the chamber. Next speaker.
Thank you. Good morning, supervisors. My name is Doug Shoemaker. I'm the president of Mercy Housing California. I listened to the wide variety of comments today, and obviously nobody in this room is very happy with the moment we're in. I want to make 3 suggestions to you as supervisors. First, I think it's critically important to understand that the first 18 to 24 months for any new permanent supportive housing building is really hard. It's hard on the staff, it's hard on residents, it can be hard on neighbors, as people are describing here. I think it's critically important that we fund those first 18 to 24 months differently than we fund other periods of time. We need additional staffing support. It's incumbent on you to make sure HSA has that support. When we open these buildings, there's just a tough period for residents that haven't lived inside. And it's really tough on staff. We mostly be working with 15 to 20% vacant staff positions because, frankly, the salaries are not high enough based on what we receive from the city. And I know that's hard to hear, but it's really important to understand. The second is, we operate 40 buildings in San Francisco. 15 of them have some supportive housing in them. The notion that our frontline staff who get paid $20 an hour, $22 an hour, $25 an hour to man a front desk or staff a front desk are somehow going to be able to do what the police department is unable or in some cases unwilling to do makes no sense. It is also nonsensical that a security guard is going to handle those issues. What you heard today from neighbors, residents, a bunch of folks is like, these are issues that require a police response. And I think the question, Supervisor Dorsey, that I would like you to ask is, how is it possible when the police come to our buildings, they don't actually do the job that we need the police to do, but we're asking private individuals and private security to do what the police can't? So I think it's really time to think about what is the appropriate 911 response. It is not the permanent supportive housing provider's job to act like a police force, nor is it our job to supervise one. We desperately need you and the other members of the board to work with the police department to figure out what that role really should be and get them to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Robert Weber, and I've worked with Jeff Kaczynski. I've worked with the Coalition on Homelessness and Jennifer. And as a community organizer and an activist, I represent MB9 as a tenant and also as somebody who sees both sides of this picture. Granted, we've had great challenges with very few tenants that are disruptive. And I live on the courtyard side. Personally, I have a megaphone, and I take care of issues within my audible parameter. I didn't realize the problem had gotten so bad in the front of the building as it had until recently, and I agree that they should be moved to other units that are not on the street. But on that being said, in the prevention matter, I believe that every organization that houses formerly homeless people, marginally housed people, they all need to go and take the lessons on how to serve the underserved of the community, which is taught at City College, and it's called a Community Health Worker Certificate. It only takes 1.5 years to do. I think we should give them the parameters of 2 years to get these certificates to all the employees that work there. That would be the crux of solving the whole thing. It really would. Because we wouldn't need a security guard because they would know how to handle the situations. Thank you. I drafted the letter about this. I'll deliver it this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Can we have the next speaker, please?
Buenos días, mi nombre es Beatriz Almazán y vivo en el edificio de China Bay 5410.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Georgina Gomez. I am a bilingual resident counselor, and I'm here to translate and to help support the resident. She said her name is Beatriz Almazán, and she is a resident of 410 China Basin.
Reconozco que hemos sido vecinos que quizás no nos hemos comportado como deberíamos, pero no todos en el edificio somos así.
She said she understands that she knows that as a neighbor to the other residents, that she knows that they have other residents that have probably not behaved in a proper way, but she just wants to let everyone know that that's why she's here, because not everyone is the same.
La mayoría de los que estamos ahí somos gente que nos quedamos sin casa por el COVID y esta fue una oportunidad para no vivir más en las calles.
The reason why she got brought to 410 China Basin Street was because she, during the COVID pandemic, she had become homeless, and thanks to the shelter she got sent to and thanks to Homerise, now she is housed.
Y lo único que les pido que nos den la oportunidad de poder arreglar la situación, porque la verdad no nos gustaría volver a vivir ni en la calle ni en los albergues.
She's just asking to please give them another opportunity to show that they can make a difference. And that she does not want to be back in the streets.
Homerise es una gran empresa que nos ha ayudado a todos y yo creo que ellos tomarán las medidas pertinentes.
She said that she feels that Homerise is a good how you say it? Sorry, I'm just a little nervous. It's a good
medidas pertinentes.
It's a good organization, basically, that they just know that she knows that they can take better measurements on fixing things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Theodore Sincata. I'm a homeowner and resident of SOMA, and I'm very empathetic about what's going on in the city and getting people housing. I think the problem that I see currently, and one of the reasons we're here is for solutions, is when we're working with HSS, we're not getting the solutions that we need. I'm just going to tell a story that in the first 2 years that I lived in SOMA, somebody from one of the supportive housing buildings next to mine didn't like my building for whatever reason, and we got, basically the building was defaced. We was spit on constantly. We went to the police, we went to the management, and nothing could be done. So I feel like one of the big reasons that we are so against anymore, and use the number 3%, every time you put another supportive housing in, that's next, 3% actually grows exponentially. So what we need is some guardrails to say, hey, if there's some sort of a problem that's not working for the community, we want that to be resolved. And as of right now, we don't have a resolution if that does come. And we're all afraid that that's going to happen because we don't want to be on calls for the next few months to fix things. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Yes, my name is Yolanda Catzalco. And I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, it seems that everything that California and San Francisco, starting in San Francisco and the Bay Area, has been public safety. Why do people rob? Why do they steal? Why do they commit violent crimes? A lot of them don't have money. They use drugs. Why don't we ask them, why do you use drugs? I think a lot of us know why people use drugs. In rich neighborhoods, they go to museums, symposiums, art galleries. The poor don't have nothing but drugs, unfortunately. Nixon's war on drugs was to stop the movement against the people that were fighting against the war in Vietnam, and specifically targeting the blacks with heroin and the hippies with marijuana. But what I also like to say is that encampments in Oakland and in San Francisco, where there's a large community, those people in all Tennessee, all over the country, in Sacramento, they want collectives, they want community, they want culture. In Wood Commons in Oakland, they had no drug deaths, they had no deaths. Ever since then, they've been evicted, 10 people have died, some of them from drug overdoses. And so it's not about why, it's about why do people use drugs and addressing that. Another thing I'd like to say is that Kyle Ritterhouse, the guy that shot and killed 2 people in a protest over the George Floyd being killed by the police. He was acquitted. The Supreme Court is scared of the Republican reactionaries that are threatening violence, and they are addressing that. But the poor, they engage in violence, or evict them and arrest them, put them in mental institutions. And Prop E and Prop F was nothing but against the poor. It was against our democratic rights.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker.
Hello, Supervisor. My name is Lewis Clark. I'm a resident of 410 Conservation Street. I just want to say that, I've been 25 years. When I come to this city, I didn't come here to be homeless. I got somehow, I lost jobs and everything, and people belittled me, and I ended up homeless. Okay? I spent 25 years on these streets. Not one time did anybody ever come offer me housing until COVID come along. And I jumped right on the wagon, because I don't want to be here no more. And it's like, we got mental health. We got people there that have mental health problems. We got people that are hypochondriacs. Just want to call the doctor, go to the police, think there's something wrong with them. But, it's in all walks of life, man. We got to love each other. We can't just, put people down. It's like, like my next door neighbor. Okay, the person you say yelling out the window, that's my next door neighbor. And granted, she does yell out the window and everything, but she hears voices, and nobody can keep her from hearing them voices, and nobody can keep her from reacting to them. And I think it's just, give it a chance, man. It'll work out. We just, like you said, we got to put them to the inside so people don't have to see them on the outside, or we find a place to put them all in one place. But as far as the, I don't know, all I know is I appreciate having a place to go. And I appreciate having, because the last 25 years have been the most stressful 25 years of my life. And I don't know, I ain't got nothing else to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker.
Members of the committee, thank you for taking the time to convene the hearing. My name is Beth Stokes. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Community Services. We operate quite a few 100% supportive housing sites in San Francisco. First and foremost, I wanted to recognize the concerns and frustration regarding public safety in the city and around properties in support of supportive housing. These issues are impacting residents throughout San Francisco. And as we're all invested stakeholders in the city, we're committed to supporting solutions. That said, I wanted to echo many of the things that the CEO of Mercy Housing, Doug Shoemaker, said. Some of the things that I think are before us are real solutions. I think it's engagement with our neighbors well before often, a building is open. It really requires a tremendous amount of time and investment to work with our neighbors. I think in very clear and necessary ways. I also think that in contracting for supportive housing, as Doug was saying, for folks that don't know, certainly the first 2-3 years often are very challenging years with 100% supportive housing properties. And I do think that there's ways that we can go about staffing those buildings differently. For many that don't know, after 5 or 6 o'clock, often we don't have case managers on the property, and there's one front desk person. And that usually applies over the weekend as well. Even though there's 24/7 staffing, that has great limitations. So I just want to say that we're all committed to solutions, but I think that there are solutions embedded before us if we work together on those. So thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Charles Defarge. I'm the Director of Policy at ECS, Episcopal Community Services. I also want to acknowledge some of the concerns raised today and throughout this process. I work at 8th and Howard every day, so believe me, I see it. I see the crime. I see some of the conditions of the neighborhood, the drug use. I also want to be super clear that permanent supportive housing is not the cause of these issues. And equating residents of PSH to criminals is wrong and really shuts down the conversation that I believe, that we all believe we need to have to improve these sites. So appropriate staffing, community engagement, good neighbor policies, these things can and in most cases do ensure that PSH is a positive presence in the neighborhood and that the residents of the building can be a part of the neighborhood as well. Again, if we're serious about solving homelessness, we need to increase investments in PSH, not shut them down. It is the most effective way, the most effective intervention at our disposal to end chronic homelessness. So thank you, and please let's work together to ensure that these programs work for their tenants as well as the broader community.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Goulet Mousset, and I am the Community Engagement Manager with Episcopal Community Services. My role brings immense joy as I connect with community members at our permanent supportive sites, listening to their stories. Our community is made up of young parents, single mothers and fathers, immigrant families, disabled individuals, single adults, and senior citizens. These residents gather for community meetings, share meals, and engage in healing conversations. Their resilience and determination to thrive exemplify the very best of San Francisco and inspire me to advocate for a more equitable city. Today's discussion raises a concerning narrative, one that unfairly places blame on permanent supportive housing for public safety concerns. While we acknowledge the importance of addressing safety, we must recognize that challenges run deeper. Homelessness, mental health struggles, and the lack of affordable housing contributes to the complex issues in our city. Let us not forget that those residing in permanent supportive housing are not immune to crime and violence. They too face these hardships. Accountability is crucial and there is work to be done, but outright rejection of a site is not a solution. Instead, we must ensure that our approach to public safety includes everyone, especially the most vulnerable among us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Javier Bermond, and I'm an organizer with the Coalition on Homelessness. This hearing, though it started out with praise for supportive housing, ended up being about criminalizing poverty. As someone who's worked in supportive housing buildings, I don't appreciate that people who struggle to get off the streets and into housing are reduced to some scary graphs of crime statistics. Supportive housing communities are important and vital to many formerly homeless residents across the city. If we want to alleviate the use of shelter, emergency rooms, and jails, we need to expand permanent supportive housing. We need to be more collaborative and creative about homelessness. It can't always just be more cops. We get public safety through house keys, not handcuffs. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Remy Tan. I'm a local architect, urban planner, and I'm speaking here in support of the permanent supportive housing. The graphs that were and charts were shown shows it works. That's 97% success on the Mission Bay one and 95% success on the one on Folsom Street. That's an A+, at school. The issue is that 3% and the 5% are extremely disruptive. So the solution is not throwing out PSH and HHH with the baby with the bathwater. It's addressing those 3 and 5%, which means putting more mental health issues. I mean, we saw from the slides with the broken window and the person masturbating that it's a mental health problem in the lady streaming. They need help right away, and that it can't go 9-10 months. That's unfair to the resident. It needs to be addressed within a day, because that person could have jumped out of the window and landed on the floor, and that's unfair to him. And the police need to do their job on addressing the outside factors like the drug dealers and the disruptive loud music, which we have ordinances for. You're not supposed to deal drug. You're not supposed to have disturbing music. You're not supposed to spray graffiti on the building. So get those criminals arrested, and then make them do restitution, paint murals, and clean up the area around. I mean, jail is probably not the solution, but do make them do work to clean up the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, thank you. My name is Johnny Gustitich. I am a resident of Mission Bay. I'm also a native. My wife and I are native to this area. We have roots in the working class going back 100 years. We care about this city. My allegiance is to San Francisco, right, and how we can make this great city even better. I'm not an extremist, as I work with Marcel and Janae and Greg on a monthly basis, and once we actually created attention, right, we are seeing some tangible, so there is progress, which is good, for Homerise Mission Bay. My concern is, of course, there has to be a balance between compassion and pragmatism. And I get it on all sides, what we're trying to do, but collectively, it is my belief, after reading every word of every website for HSH, I'm a word reader, that there's something missing, right? It's not just criteria, it's not just guardrails, it's how are the checks and balances to actually treat the people in need. And back to the 3 to 5%, right? They will cause 95% of the chaos. It's not doing themselves a service. That is actually causing more harm to the individual and the community at large, right? And that is inclusive of Mission Bay 9 within Mission Bay. I do not distinguish or disambiguate. We are collectively together, and we need to solve this. We need your help, right? This will not solve. And to Mercy Housing's point, the first 24 months are critical. We cannot ignore and we cannot have HSH stick their head in the sand and not do anything, because the level of actual tangible results over the last 6 months has been zero, other than we'll look into it, right? So that is frustrating as a resident, and it's frustrating as a community member. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer Friedenbach from the Coalition on Homelessness. You know, we need solutions. We have a humanitarian crisis on the streets. Permanent supportive housing is a fantastic solution for a good size of that population. But there's, you know, it's there because of this chronic underinvestment in creating housing. We have in San Francisco a severe shortage. We have thousands of people that have registered for coordinated entry that are unhoused, that are unable to access housing. And typically people are homeless for about 10 years before they get housing. So we need a lot more housing. So what are the barriers? Of course, it's the investment piece. You know, we need it from the federal and state, also from the municipal government. But we also have an issue around folks not wanting stuff in their neighborhoods, not wanting shelters, not wanting buildings, not wanting poor people in general in their neighborhoods. And I just want to take issue with the hearing and calling out one particular provider and kind of putting them on blast. These are some really serious socioeconomic inequities that we're dealing with here, and people are working really hard to try to address those. And there's just kind of like this bashing of nonprofits that's happening, underpaying of the workers who are mostly Black and brown, and kind of just as well as very anti-homeless sentiment. And I feel like the structure of the hearing really fed into that, unfortunately. And I think working with community and setting these things up, because there are important conversations that are happening. There are a lot of solutions that are brought forward, but they could be done in a lot more constructive way. We have a situation right now where folks are stuck in shelter because there's no housing. We need more of it. There's nothing that solves homelessness like a home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Friedenbach. Next speaker.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Nikita Farr, and I am the program director at Compass Clara House, a transitional housing program for families experiencing homelessness. We serve families, parents, children. Our program disrupts intergenerational patterns of homelessness. Our program provides support and promotes self-advocacy. Our program works. Like our program, PSH is designed to provide supportive services for the most vulnerable members of our community. We're talking about families with minor children, seniors, transitional age youth, adults, yes, many of our most vulnerable community members. Compass Family Services and our programs work to provide services and support for families to begin to heal from traumas, and homelessness causes trauma. Our transitional housing program is in Hayes Valley, a very affluent community, and we have been there for 30 years. While we hired a security guard position for a short period of time, it did not address safety concerns. Instead, our families felt policed. When we replaced the security guard with a community worker position who was able to build rapport and support families, families were no longer intimidated. It also saved us some money. Before working with families, I worked with transitional age youth experiencing homelessness, that's 18 to 24-year-olds, at a low barrier shelter. When we supported youth in connecting to mental health resources, educational opportunities, and employment, the police and fire department asked if we closed the shelter. We didn't close the shelter. We didn't hire security. We built relationships, helped identify needs and goals by working with each youth, and connected youth to resources within the community. Within 3 months of having access to support and resources, employment rates went from 15 to 82%. Social services, access to resources, and community alternatives to policing do work. When people have the support they need, they're able to stabilize, begin to build support within their own communities, and like the residents at Clara House have done for 30 years, they support one another with childcare, share food, share resources, and build support networks. I ask you to consider those with lived experience of being unhoused and or unsheltered, and providers who work to support those with lived experience.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the bilingual case manager at Compass Family Services, the Clara House program. As someone who does direct services with families experiencing homelessness, I would like to ask the Board of Supervisors to please consider the impact this will have on our community. The city of San Francisco is in a housing crisis, and it is the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors to create legislation that impacts the community in a way that is inclusive of the populations that are most vulnerable to this social problem. I invite the Board of Supervisors to not create legislation that criminalizes these families and makes them feel persecuted, but instead consider how to come up with legislation that promotes the unity of the community and works to break down these issues so that the work that I do can continue to be geared towards breaking down generational curses. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm the after-school coordinator and after-case manager at Compass Clara House, a transitional housing program from Compass. I work with the kids and the families on a daily basis. I interact with them and I see the big impact these kind of programs have in them, from starting to get better grades at school to enhancing parenting skills. In the 18-month period we have with them, we can see the big progress these individuals can have. They become more organized, they find better ways to navigate systems, and they acquire skills that promote self-advocacy and stability. They need safe harbors to thrive. Our children deserve a system that gives them the support they need in order to bloom and go out there and better serve the world. And if I'm allowed to say a final thought, I would say that instead of using money for security in our sites, what we need is more support. From the communities, from the neighborhoods, and the higher ed systems. We need more stability for those families. We need more stability for those children. If this community doesn't provide them that, who else is going to do it? I'm here on behalf of our children. They don't need more trauma in their lives. They need more support. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
Supervisors Stefani and Haney and Guardia, who is here, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Mental health is a huge issue that is very important to me, with someone that has lived with a clinical diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder since the summer of 2015. I've been 5150'd 4 times in San Francisco, spent about 3.5 months in mental health facilities, group homes, 25 sessions of electric shock therapy, and a month in Taipei, Taiwan, which I have dual citizenship. I live in D10. I'm actually disappointed that Shaman Walton, my supervisor, is not here, since District 10, Bayview, Hunters Point, there's actually 3 developments currently going up. Mercy Housing might be all 3. So I would look at what's happening in Bayview, because there's lots of space, and would also look at what's happening at Candlestick Park with the RVs, where they have the navigation center. Saturday is actually World Bipolar Day. So I'm actually happy that I'm still alive, but I love San Francisco, love to create chaos, love trouble. Jill Biafra ran for mayor. If you take a look at the people that have submitted their paperwork for mayor, you'll see that I have submitted above Daniel Lurie, because we have ranked choice voting where you can actually vote for up to 10 people. I'm going to create chaos. I want Daniel Lurie to win. Mic drop.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker.
Good morning. It's heartbreaking to hear the struggle of supportive housing residents, and I feel embarrassed that this can sound like I'm against supporting housing. The reality is most of us probably believe in supporting housing. My name is Jose Samudio Meyer. I am a resident in SOMA on Sumner Street for the past 5 years. 1174 is not in my backyard situation. Supportive housing is complex. Adding more to an already struggling and saturated area is not right. Fragility and care are not just a human condition, it's also a community condition. This project puts strain and continues to tear at the already struggling neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Chris Calandrillo, Chief Program Officer at Episcopal Community Services. And I agree with many of the things my colleagues have shared today, so I'm going to go off script because I don't want to say the same thing one more time. I'm going to tell you two really short stories. One, we are getting prepared to provide services at a new PSH building. There's 100 residents. Recently, we learned that 70% of those residents, 70 residents out of the 100, will have serious mental illness. So the current staffing plan is just what Beth Stokes described. It's 4 case managers during the day and 1 overnight desk clerk. For folks with serious mental illness, which includes schizophrenia and things of that type. So I went to the Department of Public Health with my handout, and they said maybe, because we need clinicians in that building for it to be safe, for it to be effective. Another example is last week, we called the police to come in and help with one of our residents who was having an episode. He was throwing furniture out the window that had hit people. The police said they couldn't do anything, so we called Psych Emergency Services, and Psych Emergency Services said they couldn't do anything because the police didn't do anything. In both of these situations, the nonprofit partner is holding the ball. The nonprofit partner is accountable without the resources we need to be able to do our jobs. What we need, the solution, is for the city departments to come to the table and figure out how to work this system together in planning and executing the services. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, thank you so much, supervisors. My name is Kay, one of the co-owners of the Bay of Burma restaurant, which is located in 117 Full Folsom, and a resident who have lived and worked in SOMA West for over 4 years. So since the opening, our restaurant have encountered numerous problems, including 2M robberies, vandalism, theft, and harassments, etc. And we've been sending all the evidence and videos for that, and yet the situation has not been improved. And operating a business gets more harder and harder, and we are very afraid it will get only worse when the facility actually takes over. And the city of San Francisco has bought the building for several months already, and the situation has not improved yet. So the intention of HSH is indeed good, with the strong rules and regulations or requirements, but without following them and failing them as promised, then it will all be useless. So I want to repeat what we've been asking for a long time. It's that we urge to enhance security measures in our neighborhood to ensure a safe environment for children, families, and individuals. with increased vigilance, we can collaborate with government and nonprofit agency or HSH to assist those in need on the streets, prioritizing safety above all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Janaea Jackson, and I'm the CEO of Homerise. I apologize for not being here earlier, but I want to explain to you why I wasn't here earlier. One of our residents, someone we provide resident services for at one of our properties, decided to file a restraining order against me personally. I went to court this morning at 8:30 and was the last person to be heard because this person is a known quantity for filing restraining orders that are bogus. So I apologize for not being here today. The judge asked me to leave while the person was continuing to overtalk her in the court so that I could get here. And I was hoping to go after the residents spoke so that I'd have a chance to do our presentation myself. So I want to thank Marcel for doing that. I'm disappointed at the format of this meeting. I'm disappointed because it's like you guys forgot who Homerise is, who we've been to the city for the last 30 years. We house 30% of folks who are formerly homeless in the city. 30%. We have very few properties that have complaints. We have one property right now that is in its beginnings, where 3% of our folks are struggling with some very serious issues that are having some serious impacts, nuisance impacts on our community. We need to make sure we keep this in context. What we need are solutions, but the solutions are not more security guards. It's more of a focus on that 3% and what they need to be successful in our housing, in our PSH housing, if that's where we're going to house them. We need to look at how the system is not working correctly at this time, is not serving all San Franciscans. So I hope in the future, when we have more discussions about this, we can focus our conversations on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm RJ Sloan. I'd like to respectfully point out a fundamental flaw in Supervisor Dorsey's data presentation, specifically the bar graph demonstrating calls for service in Supervisor Dorsey's PowerPoint presentation. Really, in order to properly assess calls for service data of PSH buildings, you really must show the calls for service data of non-PSH buildings on or near the same block. Housing is healthcare, and I'd like to repeat a previous speaker's phrase, home keys, not handcuffs. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hello, I have handouts. Hello, supervisors. I am Hélène Sautou with a mid-market community benefit district. I want to thank Supervisor Dorsey for calling this hearing because the impacts of supportive housing on neighborhoods is a very big deal. We are experts. Our CBD alone has 40 SROs, 40 social service sites, and hundreds of additional supportive housings, many of which are on 6th Street, and some of them poorly run. With little to no consideration is ever given to how some of these facilities impact the neighborhood. Unfortunately, a number of the occupants or their friends or visitors engage in negative behaviors on the sidewalks. Open-air drug use is rampant. In my handouts, I have copies of photos for reference, which I'd like to show. This is in vicinity of 6th Street. This is Jesse at 6th Street. This is Min Plaza. Meanwhile, nearby good businesses keep closing, and the new businesses opening up are late-night convenience operators catering to the drug market and other criminal activities. Please start at ground zero on 6th Street and in the Tenderloin by making inside and outside conditions a priority for all HSH sites and allocate funding specifically for security at existing sites. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is James Spinello, and I care deeply about the SOMA West community. I've actually brought and supported some supportive housing into the neighborhood. But why this project at 1174 Folsom became so contentious was because the neighbors weren't being heard at all. For the past 4 years, the city forces things into a neighborhood. They put a meth sobering center in. They put a project at the corner of 6th and Bryant. They put a project at 333 12th Street, and they put a project at the corner of 9th and Mission, the panoramic, and now they put the project of 1174 Folsom. All of these projects were forced into the neighborhood, and none of them listened to the requests of the neighbors. The majority of the problems come from, I feel, that all of these projects, they stop right at the front door. The funding is for within the facility. It's not outside the facility. These projects, as this presentation is talking about, is the impact that those present. The neighborhood gets an impact. It's not beneficial for the neighborhood as the city cleans up the rest of the city and houses the homeless in these projects. There's no preferential treatment for the homeless that are in the neighborhood. I've actually asked for statistics, how many have been done there. The main things are, I feel, is you need some of the budget always to go help the neighborhood. And that's what's missing. It ends right at the front door, and there's nothing for the neighborhood. The community needs some of those funds when a project is put in. And so far, all of the funds are within the facility. And that is the main problem, and that's why this became so contentious, because all of those projects I mentioned, not one thing has been done for the neighborhood in 4 years.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
Good fucking afternoon. My name is Jordan. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and I am a PSH tenant that lives in D5, but within walking district of District 6. Now, two things can be possible at once. That permanent supportive housing and Housing First is an effective intervention, at the way we do permanent supportive housing needs a lot of work. We also need to be grateful that things aren't fucking worse right now, which it would be if these wealthy asshole neighbors get their way in NPSH. Instead of constructive and collaborative solution, the Dorsey's ass over here has decided to hold this bullshit ass hearing and waste all our fucking time to get answers for what we all know. That PSH tenants are not to be feared and are a good addition to our neighborhoods. Bad cop, no donut. And I am sick and fucking tired of me and my fellow tenants being demonized. Despite my big, mean New Jersey Wapdike personality at the mic, I'm actually a pretty docile person. And don't go around bothering my neighbors, harassing people on the street, or stabbing them, or throwing furniture out the window, or masturbating in public. I was able to get so much out of being housed. Most of the crime around PSH is caused by people who don't live in these neighborhoods. I am a PSH success story. I got my health care needs met, both trans and otherwise, a commission appointment, and a community organizing victory, and I want our unhoused neighbors to have fulfilling experiences as well as be able to organize for better conditions and constructive solutions inside and outside our buildings, as well as neighborhood needs, which many of us do already. Fuck this hearing to hell. It was unnecessary and fucking stupid. I yield my time. Fuck you.
Next speaker.
Hi, supervisors. I am Marnie Regan from Larkin Street Youth Services, and I'm also co-chair of HESPA. So quick fact check. There are no tenants at 1174 Folsom. So I'm questioning the SOMA West claims about negative impacts on the neighborhood when it's not even open. There's 0 people living there. Also, can we get hard data from SOMA West claim and all these children being murdered on the streets? Because that's really disturbing, but I don't think it's true. So even though this hearing is specifically about an adult site in Mission Bay, the 1174 Folsom Tay site which isn't open yet, is being terribly weaponized by the opposition against Mission Bay. So on behalf of TAY service providers, I feel I need to respond. So what makes a successful TAY PSH site, and what we support and encourage, is that when 1174 or any other TAY site are open, they include intensive on-site services, community ambassadors, and community engagement. These are standards that we uphold and maintain. HESPA wants to reiterate that supportive housing rent-paying tenants are not criminals and should not be treated or viewed as such. They are members of these neighborhoods who work and live their lives. The real issues are on the streets outside of these sites. We implore the city to surge compassionate resources like CART, for example, to assist folks on our streets who are in crisis instead of furthering a false narrative that claims that PSH sites themselves are hotbeds of crime. This is just factually incorrect and really damaging and hurtful to the tenants who live there, work hard, pay rent, and just want to live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Al Kwok. I live at the Metro. I would like to share with you two of my experiences from how Homerise has impacted my neighborhood. One, open drug use. People gather at the sidewalk area between Homerise and the building next door, the public safety building. This spot is right next to the garage entrance used by the police there, literally just a foot or two away. They do it openly there, and they get away with it. Number two, drug deals. This is what I see. The sliding door opens, a resident walks out, someone is waiting, the person tosses him a small package, the resident goes back in, the other person sweeps away on a skateboard, done in seconds, and no consequences. I don't walk down the side of the street anymore. I mean, I would like to someday where I can just talk to the residents, talk about baseball, football, and our struggling warriors, but at this point, I am confused and I'm afraid. This is how Homerise has impacted my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Leah Edwards, and I live across the street from the 1174 Folsom site. I first moved to SOMA West in 2015 and operate a small business in my home across the street. I spend most of my spare time being engaged in nonprofits and deeply, deeply love the SOMA community and am really pained to see it in its current state. I understand the need for more supportive housing. I've spent a lot of time in the community. I know that it can have a positive impact. I know the research that supports this. However, I'm deeply concerned by the implementation that we have seen in the Mission Bay site and the process that we have seen in the treatment that residents surrounding the site have seen from HSH over the past several months related to 1174. I already see extensive drug use and dealing on a daily basis in front of my home. A couple months back, I was walking home a couple blocks from my apartment and saw an armed robbery 30 feet in front of me. So you can understand why I am concerned when the street conditions in SOMA are already so terrible that we may start to see similar issues as we're hearing from the project in Mission Bay. I understand that most residents of supportive housing are not causing issues. I've interacted with many of these residents over the years, and I'm glad that they have a housing option. However, as we have heard from both residents of supportive housing today and from the representative from Homerise, there are unfortunately a few disruptive folks who are causing persistent serious issues, and both the police and HSH have not addressed the problems after months of engagement. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good morning, and thank you for hosting us today. My name is Sean Nishi, and I live in Madrone. As someone who has lost their family home as a teenager, I sympathize with the pain that Homerise is trying to solve. However, they're failing. Over the past months, I've seen firsthand a man trying to commit suicide by jumping out of his window. I've seen a Homerise employee rush at a mother and a child as a man fights to hold the employee back and another tries to protect the mother and child. These are not nuisance impacts. Homerise is not providing the support and environment their tenants deserve. I urge you to require Homerise to have supportive services on site 24/7 to create a safer environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Tabitha Allen, and I am a co-chair of the Supportive Housing Providers Network. Permanent supportive housing is necessary and effective for the majority of the tenants that are housed and supported, and has been effective for 25 years. Permanent supportive housing is not a medical facility, it's not a mental health facility, it's independent housing that offers support services on site. HSH has increased funding for additional on-site support services. There are collaborations with various outside providers that have assisted in providing additional support that is not offered on site. Services are still limited and often and voluntary, and often don't provide support on evenings and weekends. On evenings and weekends, desk clerks are frequently working alone with no clinical support and no after-hours crisis support. All of the support, as I mentioned, is voluntary, and there will always be some tenants that need support that we're not able to offer or don't engage with the support that is offered. Alternative responses take time: relocation to another site, eviction if that is necessary, stabilization after connection to services. Often housing with the level of care needed for individuals with high acuity is not available. We recommend investments in more supportive housing that has more clinical support on site, places that people can transfer to that offer higher levels of support, keeping in mind, and I've heard a recommendation several times today, that we should just move people to the other side of the building or transfer people. That is not a simple solution. These are people that have leases, that have a right to stay in those units, and we cannot force them to move. And if we're working with people that have mental health issues, they're going to be resistant to that change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I just want to comment more about the systems that we have in place right now in San Francisco and beyond, and share some basic data with you. Look, right now in San Francisco, an average of approximately 37 to 38 people are dying every month inside permanent supportive housing from drug overdose, period. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, in December last year and January this year, 77 people died inside permanent supportive housing because of drug overdose, right? During the pandemic, we had shelter-in-place hotels that were run with the same low-barrier model in many cases as permanent supportive housing. One hotel in particular had over $26 million of damage done to it by people that were clearly not housing ready. We need to start thinking about things like Supervisor Mandelman's A Place for All proposal, where we're building bridges for people, bridges to permanent supportive housing. If you take someone off the street and put them in a shelter, stabilize them, maybe get them treatment if that's what's needed, and get them ready, their outcomes in permanent supportive housing would be better, and we wouldn't have to have hearings like this, because people, the residents in the community, would not be up in arms about the conditions of the facilities. I know that there's one permanent supportive housing facility in China Basin right now that had over 1,000 calls of service last year, and you probably talked about that, but 600 911 calls, right? That means there's people in that building that are in crisis all the time, and much of it revolves around substance use disorder. So there's an assembly bill that's coming in California this year, very soon, which I will be talking to all three of you supervisors about, that's going to actually try to level the playing field and introduce a change to Senate Bill 1380, which will allow for up to 25% of funding to go to recovery-based housing, which is what we really need in San Francisco. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Flo Kelly, and I live in District 9, and I volunteer with the Coalition on Homelessness. I think today you've heard a lot of possible ways of making improvements, and I just want to list a few here. One is to increase the investments in PSH. Another is to prepare neighbors before a PSH program begins. Another, increase mental health services, big time. Have mental health workers working 24/7 in PSH buildings. Invest more dollars within the first 18 to 24 months of setting up a PSH building, because there's so many problems that need to be solved right at the beginning. And the Board of Supervisors, PSH organizations, people who live in the PSH building, neighbors, and HSH all work together. Additionally, we need more federal and state investment in PSH. I really want to appreciate that you gave 2 minutes to all of the outstanding public comment that we heard. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm currently serving an AmeriCorps term with the Permanent Housing Advanced Clinical Services team that was mentioned earlier. Hearing the criminalization of PSH residents today and the othering of PSH communities was extremely disheartening. PSH isn't the problem. The problem is lack of affordable housing, lack of mental health resources, lack of substance use resources. There's no doubt that there is a portion of PSH residents that are high acuity and that are disruptive, but I don't think the solution is to displace or move them or blame entire communities of PSH residents. It was mentioned earlier that PSH sites only work with appropriate resources and appropriate funding, and I think that we should work to get those appropriate resources and that appropriate funding as opposed to blaming the communities and essentially taking those resources away. Thank you.
Greetings, supervisors. My name is David Elliott Lewis. I'm a former District 6 resident who was redistricted out, but I'm also a former Homerise resident. For over a decade, it used to be called Community Housing Partnership. I am forever grateful for the housing that Homerise gave me to let me rebuild my life and eventually move up to a regular apartment. It took me over a decade to do that. So I'm a living kind of testimonial that permanent supportive housing works. It worked for me in rebuilding my life. I want to also acknowledge that everyone has a right to quiet enjoyment of their living space, everyone. But I think the way to go about it is something that I'd like to hear more of in this meeting, which is for the residents of MB9 or 1174 Folsom and the residents in the surrounding buildings that encompass that to get to know each other. I would ask all residents in both sides to not see the other resident as the other side of the street, the other side of the track. They're your neighbors, and they're human beings trying to get on with their lives and make the best, sometimes of a bad circumstance. So say hello to your neighbors, invite them, and maybe invite them to a community event or create a community event, a street party, or if you have a community room in your property, some kind of event that lets you get to know each other. As you start to see each other as human beings with needs and the valued right to quiet and privacy, I think that'll go a long way toward improving the quality of life of everyone. I submit this plea to get to know your neighbor to all parties involved. I think that is the first step in resolving this. Again, David Elliott Lewis, Tenderloin People's Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is John Avalos, and I'm with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. Many of our members, including Homerise, Episcopal Community Services, and Swords to Plowshares, provide permanent supportive housing and are members of the Supportive Housing Providers Network who presented here today. While I don't want to disclaim the security concerns of SOMA and Mission Bay residents, I'm concerned in the quality of the discussion about what creates community safety. The focus on this hearing, the way data was shared without sufficient context, without any real timeline about how changes in police calls and deployment have been made over the 18 months, drives to a very narrow conclusion that we should just be increasing security and police staffing in the area, but without really discussing the quality of deployment and what measures can be put in place to ensure that the efforts that security might provide can actually lead to real differences. Instead, we just have a drive to increase the amount of people, security personnel around. We also have a very narrow focus on supportive housing. Supportive housing, as you heard from Homerise, has a 30-year history just for Homerise alone in San Francisco, have made incredible improvements on people's lives, provide an array of services that are really high quality in behavioral health and mental health services that need greater investment. These are what help residents change their lives and also to improve both the residents they live in as well as the neighborhoods they live in as well. There is a great need for greater community engagement. I believe that's the role of the city under the Housing and Support, the Department of Housing and Support, Homelessness and Supportive Housing, and the police department, and under the mayor's leadership to ensure that we can hear more readily what concerns the neighbors have and how to best address them with a partnership with the city and our nonprofit providers. That is the best way to achieve public safety, and I hope you can reach out that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Barry Graves. I am a resident of San Francisco, a native. I'm homeless. I am also a resident services team leader at Homerise. I also grew up here in City Hall. My great-grandmother was the late Willie B. Kennedy. I've seen what this city can do. I've seen what several districts can do when they work together, despite the bickering of several supervisors in those districts or who saw over those districts. What we have here is not a Homerise problem. What we have here is a San Francisco problem. We have a city problem. We have drug addiction. We have mental health issues. We have violence, and that occurs everywhere. What I'm seeing is when a resident of ours is in a mental health crisis, I'm seeing that a neighbor from across the street will call our CEO who's here today. Pressure would be put on our staff because the neighbor wants something done immediately. I have seen staff paint someone's window because of what a neighbor wanted done. I've seen staff rinse down the front of our building while someone was camped out front with all of their belongings because of what a neighbor wanted done immediately. We would love for you guys to come to the table to work with us because that's what San Franciscans do. We have a long history of working together. That's the only way this city moved forward from what it once was. We can still do it, but we have to stop criminalizing those with mental health and substance abuse issues and get them the help that we need. We at Homerise need more, clinical workers. We need more clinical staff. Our front desk worker needs help. I asked for that help, and I was told no by our own employees. We need help. We're not the workers. We are not magical workers. We're not here to save any. We don't have capes. We don't have special powers. I understand my time is up, but I'm telling you right now, from someone who was raised in this city,
thank you
so much. Someone who was on the front lines
of
this city.
Thank you so much for your time.
We need help.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, committee. Today marks for me 8 months exactly and 16 days of homelessness. That's a long time. It's 260 days. Grueling. Those, not easy at all. And I'm not a beneficiary of any of this city's supportive housing environment. That whole ecosystem is closed off to me. I'm not a beneficiary of it. And I'm bummed about that because what I say is, why not? Why not? There's a lot of issues at play here. So I want you guys to come together and really think about this really hard, okay? It's not easy, but we got to make this happen. We got to make it work for everybody, all right? It's just not a few. People talk about just, they're drug dealers, they're people doing, illicit things that are not supposed to be done around supportive housing environments. But listen, can we screen? Can we screen us? Can we screen me out of all those people and maybe put me in a nice place? You know what I mean? So that's all I want to say today. I'm not going to take too much of your time, but listen to the voices here because I heard a lot. There's a lot of pain here. There's a lot of pain. People really feel it. And I hear this gentleman, this city could do great. City was a great city. It was a great place. It was a golden age where this city did things well. and it does some things well still, but this is one thing it needs to get addressed now with the urgency, with the fierce urgency of now, okay? We can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. 8 months, 16 days, okay? When are we gonna see the light? When are we gonna see the end of the tunnel? You know, is it today? Oh, you know, I'm waiting for it. I'm hoping to, you know. But thank you all for your indulgence. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Ephraim. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. Supervisor Dorsey, Supervisor Stephanie, Supervisor Dario. It's truly good to be here today. Thank you, Supervisor Dorsey, for having this hearing today. My name is Richard Beal. Somebody here said, Richard, you the Minister of Recovery, huh? I said, well, some people call me that. Say, you the TL Ambassador to Recovery, huh? I said, well, some people call me that. What I am is just an advocate for recovery. And I'm here today to talk about, you know, the need for recovery-based housing. You know, we have PSHs. I have been involved with this community for over 28 years. Currently, I'm the Director of Recovery Services for Tenderloin Housing Clinic. And I want to advocate right now for the people who are coming out of residential treatment, who are coming out of transitional housing, who are coming out of jail, but have done treatment in jail, Roads to Recovery, other programs, and are not able to access permanent supportive housing with the clean and sober environment. You know, and I think that, you know, the reason I'm late here today is because I had to leave here and go to the Sentencing Commission and speak over there about building that bridge that Tom talked about. We need that bridge so people that complete residential treatment, that complete transitional housing, can have a bridge to permanent, supportive, clean, and sober housing. You know, that's the issue. That's the issue. I know home first, housing first. I'm an advocate of housing first. I believe in housing first, but it needs to be amended. It needs to be a bridge. It needs to be that component where people are able to access recovery-based housing. Thank you, and y'all have a good day.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Christopher. I am a formerly homeless person, a resident of permanent supportive housing currently. I prefer probably about 5 years. PSH has benefited me most definitely. I would actually say that I'm thriving. I do think permanent supportive housing is broken in many ways. And there does need to be some changes. One of the things that I see is that, you know, we have coordinated entry, and in coordinated entry, you know, as the way it's set up right now, coordinated entry accepts only people with like kind of the highest level issues, and that's who they decide to get housed, and that's who they put in these buildings. And for the most case, the PSH buildings can't actually handle people with high level disability, mental health issues, and such. The staff is not paid enough, the staff is not trained, and so the solution to that eventually becomes eviction. And so there's this turnover. And the frustration for me, the way I see it as a tenant, is that you know, landlords accept these contracts to do supportive housing, but they can't actually deliver on that. But they're accepting it, so that is part of the problem. I do really like the idea of we need kind of like a PSH2 for people with high-level issues to go to, right? I also very quickly want to add that when PSH residents meet with each other, we have the same complaints about our neighborhoods. We have the same. We don't like the poop on the streets. We don't like the drug dealers everywhere. We don't like any of that stuff. And I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Do we have any additional public comment? It appears.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. If there's nobody else that would like to testify today, I will now close public comment. Supervisor Dorsey, I'll turn it back over to you and let us know whether you would like us to continue this to the call of the chair or file the hearing.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to everyone who took part in today's hearing. It's clear we have a lot of work to do at the micro level and also at the macro level. I think there are things that we need to address that are specific as well as systemic. At the macro level, I think we need to identify better alternatives to PSH for those individuals who may need higher level of care, as our last speaker said. I think that's something that we as policymakers have to look at. I think we may need in the near term to identify ways that we can move, if necessary, PSH residents to appropriate care if those individuals shouldn't have been in PSH to begin with. We may also need to address the overconcentration of our city's response to homelessness in SOMA and adjacent neighborhoods, and explore mitigations for the existing projects that might be creating quality of life issues and safety challenges. And then at the micro level, I think we need to look at some of the specific interventions that residents had, the specific examples to address ongoing problems. Again, this is really about just addressing concerns and making sure that we are earning the confidence of San Franciscans for what they want us to do. This hearing is the start of an important process to get permanent supportive housing right and to better address discrete problems identified here today. I really appreciate the collaborative tone most participants honored here today. I really think the tone gives me a lot of hope that we will get this right. So let's commit to continue to do this work, as a wise man here said today, with patience and grace. Through the chair, I would ask that we not file this hearing, but allow us the opportunity to continue it to the call of the chair so that we may revisit this topic and assess progress moving forward.
Are you making that motion?
Yes, I would like to make that motion to continue this to the call of the chair.
Madam Clerk?
And on the motion to consider this item to the call of the chair, Vice Chair Engardio. Vice Chair Engardio, aye. Member Dorsey. Member Dorsey, aye. Chair Stephanie?
Aye.
Chair Stephanie, aye. I have 3 ayes.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you please call the next item?
Yes, item number 4 is a hearing to receive an update on the implementation of the Place for All ordinance.
Thank you. This item is sponsored by Supervisor Mandelman, who is joining us here today, and I will turn it over to him to introduce the item and our presenters.
Thank you, Chair Stephanie and members Dorsey and Engardio for making time for this check-in on implementation of Place for All and more broadly on where San Francisco stands with regard to the goal of ending unsheltered homelessness. I know it has been a long day already, and I actually think this will be